Hey, everybody, and welcome to the podcast that's dedicated to making you a faster cyclist, the Ask a Cycling Coach podcast presented by TrainerRoad. I'm Coach Jonathan Lee with our head coach, Chad Timmerman.
Hi, everybody.
Our CEO, Nate Pearson.
Hello.
And we are here to answer your cycling and triathlon-related questions that you submit at trainerroad.com/podcast. Before we get into those questions today, first, a quick congratulations to Chloe Woodruff, Stan's Pivot's Chloe Woodruff. We are a sponsor of the Stan's Pivot team, and she, first of all, earned a front row call-up at the first World Cup of the cross-country World Cup of the year in Albstadt, Germany. She earned a front row call-up in the short track race, and then she got sixth place at round one in the actual XCO race.
Huge deal.
Which is huge.
How important is it? Yeah, congrats. But how important is it to be in the front row at those high-level races?
Yeah, so if anybody hasn't seen this race, we'll throw a link into forum.trainerroad.com. Just search for episode 205, which is this episode, and you'll be able to find it. But Chad, you had mentioned that you just watched this race too, but you could see, conditions aside, you can see on that first lap how big of a gap there is.
Stretched out fast.
It just stretches out so fast because if you think about it, you've got start rows of, I think it's like 8 riders wide maybe. So, and you have that all the way back on the starting grid. Well, imagine taking that and making it single file, right? When you go single file into single track,
in an instant.
If you're in the third row, you feel like you're in a good spot. But once it goes single file, you are a long way back.
It's like 20 seconds.
Yeah, exactly.
So then next question is, isn't it, like if you're in the back row, how hard is it then to move up to the front row? Like it's got to be race after race. You just move up a few spots, few spots.
You can't just go magically to the front unless you're somebody like Matthew Vanderpool or somebody like, like these standout athletes, you know.
Generational athlete.
Sure, they could get a back row call up and then, the first race they probably aren't going to win. But they'll earn themselves a better call-up. But the interesting thing is this year, the call-ups every week are based off of the short track race instead of just UCI points. So the short track race guarantees, I think, the first 3 rows. Then after that, it's UCI points. So it's a big change. And the other thing, too, with these World Cups is that a lot of the time you get into spots where it might be technical or you have rainy conditions, something like that. So then if you're caught, every rider in front of you increases the probability that you'll get caught behind somebody getting off their bike. And then that kills a bunch of time.
Yeah.
So you end up just basically, if you look at it, you have a finite amount of energy to expend in a race, so to speak. Yeah. And you just have to use so much of it in the beginning to get around and to try to get into the right position. You can kind of sit behind and wait and then hope that you'll be able to diesel your way through later. But when you do that, you're just putting yourself further behind. So your diesel effort is just going to get you perhaps not quite as far. So it's a really tough thing to balance, but really impressive for Chloe.
So the takeaway is if it's a bigger race and it goes single track soon, you have to be, well, you don't have to be, but it's a big advantage to get up front. That's why you're doing all these races to get points for nationals, so that you're in one of those front rows because it goes to single track soon?
Well, I don't know. But regardless, even if it doesn't, it's a good spot to be, right?
Yeah, you don't want to be back because there could be a lot of people.
Absolutely.
Locally, sometimes we'll have mountain bike races and it'll be 15 people, but 2 rows. Like
sure.
It doesn't really matter,
It doesn't matter.
Yeah. But in a race I don't know, how many people would be at nationals or would be at a big race?
I don't know. We'll see. I mean, it'll probably be somewhere around, I would say, 50 to 70 riders probably in our field.
Imagine 70 people strung out in single track, and then imagine one person missing something on a climb and unclipping, and then it's just 45 people stop and yelling.
Everyone takes a 10, 15-second hit just like that.
Oh, yeah.
They're pretty much the races, it's hard to, you can't, I don't know how you could win.
Your chance at winning is, and especially in this case at nationals, because we're at 9,000 feet in elevation, so it's not like you can just go hog wild and go way over your limits because you'll be punished even more so for that, right? At elevation like that.
Yeah.
So it's definitely important. Yeah.
It's like somebody crashed in front of you in a crit at the begining.
Yeah.
And it just ruins your. Well, actually, that doesn't.
You can free that back in that case. But
in a road
not
race.
so much in a XC race.
It's tough. No free laps there. The last thing I wanted to just say on this with Chloe, which is really awesome, she's been racing World Cups for 10 years now, I think, and this is her best result ever. So that shows, and I would argue that this is probably the most competitive field ever too. So I would argue that, or I guess that my point is, if you think that I've been doing this for a long time and my results are just going to go down, it isn't necessarily that way. Exactly right. Improving equipment, improving your training, improving everything else about your life, and you can still improve.
And us age groupers have an advantage because there's age groups, but she's not an age group. She's pro.
Oh, yeah.
So she's getting older and still beating younger women.
It's pretty amazing. Yeah. So good job, Chloe. That was really cool. And we may get a look into kind of the effort that she put down. She's a really tiny person, so the numbers won't be huge when you look at raw watts, but when you look at power to weight, you'll be like, holy cow, because she is extremely fast. So good job to her. And then good luck in Nova Mesto this weekend. If you want something to watch on the trainer, it's been something that I've been watching almost all week. It's been really fun to watch, just to rehash those races. And every time I watch it, I catch new things where I see a rider do a certain thing, and I mark it down in the memory bank. So then hopefully I can apply it for the next race. So. And then this isn't a question, but something funny along the lines of something we discussed. We discussed playlists and how they can motivate you, like with music when you're riding.
They lower the RPE.
Yes, and that's I believe been proven to lower RPE. Now we also talked about the opposite, and Guy says less a question and more a point to the demotivational playlist issue, because we were thinking, what if you had like a demotivational playlist? Could that somehow make you more tough? When you're pushing through things. And he said, I tried one to develop mental toughness a while back. It had Adagio for strings, Funeral March, and the Red Wedding Tune from A Game of Thrones. He says, do not try it. So that sounds miserable.
Science.
Yeah, that sounds pretty terrible.
And so just like the idea, so the idea is, well, I'm going to have suffering. I'm going to practice suffering to make suffering easier.
Yes.
But what I think he's doing in this case is he's making suffering at a lower performance level. He can have the same amount of suffering at a high performance level with the music. Yeah. You just go deeper, but then you're getting better performance and better training. So personally, I try to do all the lower RPE all around, but then so lower the RPE. So then doesn't increase the motivation. You know what I mean? Saying that I have the same RPE, but I'm just putting out more power.
Yeah, because that should be the
just
goal.
Training hard. Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Just training harder.
Yeah, exactly. Lower RPE for the same effort.
You don't lower the RPE and then do it and make it an easier workout.
Sure. Same RPE, more performance. Right?
That's it.
Just more obstacles to overcome.
Yeah, and I feel fairly confident in saying there's probably not a study that looks into demotivational music and its effect on performance.
Is
there one?
Absolutely.
They do math problems and stuff like that to like.
Oh yeah,
to work
increase cognitive load.
Before, and that totally hurts the performance.
Yeah,
and I did see something out there a while back where they had riders who relied on music for motivation during workouts, but then had to go race without music, and how there was a little downtick or maybe an uptick in RPE, downtick in performance due to that.
There's a guy, Perform MX training, I believe is how you would say it. He trains like a lot of top enduro athletes and some other ones. And when his athletes are training, he doesn't allow them to use music.
Yeah, it's interesting.
It's an interesting thing. Now, the thing is, my point, and I guess to kind of what you said with that, the counterpoint there is, when you're training, that's extremely valuable time. And if music does lower the RPE, it allows you to work at a higher level.
Yeah, if you're trying to get the most out of your workouts in terms of what your body's capable of, then use anything and everything.
And what I've personally found is that, like, come race day, I don't need the music. I'm in
the race is a
motivational
It'd be a
state.
bit too distracting anyway. I mean, there's too much going on in a mass start race.
For cycling, yes, but your idea is racing is the ultimate motivation.
Exactly right. So
you're topped off. No amount of music's going to make you go harder.
Exactly right. So I don't feel like I'm missing out. When I'm racing, I don't feel like, man, if I only had that music that I listen to when I'm training, I could perform well. I never think that because I'm just so focused on the race.
I might be completely wrong. But I believe a few years ago that running in the U.S., like the major marathons, you could not wear headphones. It didn't last very long, and they brought it back because everyone was like freaking out. But it was a safety issue.
So you can wear headphones now?
In running, like a marathon. Yeah. Like if you're doing the Boston Marathon, they're not going to yank you for wearing headphones, I think, or else everyone's breaking the rule.
I don't know.
But maybe it's a pro thing. I don't know. But so someone type in the comments.
This is going to come out as being perhaps a little mean. I hope it doesn't come out that way. But I feel like a lot of...
That's going to be mean.
I feel like a lot of people that do really big marathons like this, because there are a lot of people that are really fast, that are really going for it. But then there are also a lot of people that are just there for the day, sort of a thing. And in that sort of scenario, I could see...
It's a bucket list accomplishment.
Right. And I could see them with the music, since they're not like so motivated on like chasing a time or chasing a PB, something like that. I could see where the music, without music, it would feel like a jarring experience to not have it.
Music's really cool for running because it's such a, even though there's a lot of people around you, it's such a solo event. It's like you're doing stuff on, especially mountain biking, you're interacting with the trail, you're racing people.
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
You do these big marathons, there's 40,000 people, you're racing no one, right? Even though everyone's around you, you're not really racing a single person. And having the music, especially over 3-4 hours.
Yes. Not much changes about what you do throughout the marathon, relatively speaking, compared to...
It's just solid pacing.
Right, yeah.
It's like see, if you're going to do Race Across America, it'd be dangerous to have headphones, but maybe one, there's a whole forum thread about it, but if maybe you have music on your bars or something, that could help.
Like that. Yeah, music on the bars makes you a best friend of everybody around you on a ride, too. I'm just joking.
It really depends.
Depends on the vibe of the ride. Some rides it does.
And the music itself.
Yeah. Everyone has different tastes. It's a tough one to do.
I like yacht rock for that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Seems to work. It's a real crowd pleaser.
Sure it is. All right, Anthony's question. He says, things are starting to heat up around here. Currently, we're at 29°C. That's about 85 degrees Fahrenheit with 85% humidity. So feels like, and I'm saying that in quotes, index of 36°C or 96 degrees Fahrenheit and rising. Ugh, that sounds really, really hot and uncomfortable. We're from a really dry climate, so we're not quite used to that.
Grateful.
He says, any tips to deal with this? As an example, I did a 90-minute, 5x12-minute Sweet Spot TrainerRoad outdoor training session, and even after drinking three 750-milliliter bottles, 2 were sports mix, I was still down most of a kilogram in body weight by the end. Would salt loading help this, or would the salt stop me from sweating so much and cause me to heat up more? So he says that for a reference point, his heart rate during the last race at 0.82 IF averaged 189 beats per minute with his max at 204 beats per minute. So
He's
he
way
says,
up there.
Yeah, exactly. He's a high heart rate sort of fella.
High heart rate, and he was operating at a real high percentage of it too.
He says, and since I'm in a weird situation where my indoor training is cooler, 2 fans and a decent AC than outdoors, he says, is that advantageous for when I do train and race outdoors, or would I be better increasing my indoor heat, or would I be better off increasing my indoor heat a little bit? Or is this akin to training at sea level, living at altitude, etc.? 5 stars. So lots to unpack with this one.
Lots.
Where do you want to start, Chad?
First, let's address the whole salt loading question. The amount of sodium in your blood isn't going to dictate whether or not you sweat. I mean, if your body has water on board and cooling is a challenge, it's going to sweat. So salt content be damned. The salt content in your blood will rise and the osmolarity will change, and that'll change nutrition, hydration, and other aspects of it. But the fact is, if your body has the water to ditch in the interest of cooling, it'll do it.
I think the confusion around that probably comes from the saying that people say, like when you take in salt electrolytes, that it helps your body hold water. But we're talking about,
that's probably what it is. Yeah.
We're talking about storing water within your body. That doesn't mean that it can't sweat it out.
Yeah, and a crucial part of salt loading is water loading too. I mean, you bring in more salt so that you can retain more water, which means you're taking in more water. So you're maintaining that balance in the blood, which can result in higher body weight and puffiness and things that are undesirable to some athletes. But in terms of performance, are probably usually very beneficial.
Right.
So you just have to recognize it's not just about ingesting more salt; it's also about packing on more water.
Yeah, absolutely. So I interrupted you, but I guess jumping in on the I guess the balance side of things, on the different things that you're trying to balance. We're talking about sodium and the water balance.
Yeah, and so one of the things that can go wrong in that case is if you do ingest too much sodium, then you've got too much sodium in your gut, and of course water follows sodium, or water follows salt. Let's put it more simply. And that's where it's going to go. So it's not going to go to the muscles. It's not going to dedicate itself as effectively to thermal regulation or cooling. So you have to recognize that if it's just the same thing I said just now, more salt means more water. And if you take it on during the race, you're going to have to balance it with water intake also. So you can't just slam the salt tablets. In fact, you shouldn't be doing salt tablets anyway because of the chloride aspect of it. But if you're ingesting a sports drink with high sodium content, even then, that you could have too much sodium per bottle. I mean, that's another balance you have to figure out.
Yeah, I think so. You have a hot race, and you're like, I'm going to do these sodium gels with it.
Yeah,
but it really depends on
especially with a gel too.
Yeah, the sport I think it depends on the sport you're doing, because some people will load up on salt in their drink, and do both at the same time. If you're doing a mountain bike race, hard to drink enough water, right, to balance it.
Sure.
If you're doing an Ironman where water is like plentiful and you can't
on the run course and
everywhere.
and then you're in position and you have it, and then there's 8 stations you come across.
Triathletes have like 12 bottles on their bikes, and like you'll have plenty of water to make sure that you get the right balance.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah, and also consider, what is your sweat rate for a race? I mean, just because you're racing doesn't mean you need a whole extra heaping of sodium unless you're dumping buckets of sweat. It's a hot day. Even humidity would probably affect that too, because you're not going to shed as much water. So there really are quite a lot of things to consider.
Well, I think humidity, you'll shed more water because your evaporative cooling will be down. It'll be harder to cool off.
So your body will keep trying.
Exactly. Yeah. And you end up sweating more.
Yeah.
You end up being covered in like a bubble of humidity. Just evaporative cooling isn't as effective.
Yep.
Yeah. It's frustrating.
But just some numbers to kind of maybe put this in perspective for some people is that the people who do shed a lot of sodium when they sweat, and they're sweating a lot of salt's coming out, salt stains, all the telltale signs. We're talking the high end of it's usually like 1,000 milligrams per hour. So when you dose yourself with maybe a pre-hydration drink or a post-hydration drink, or maybe you're just thinking I need a ton of sodium during, keep that in mind. 1,000 is a pretty high. I won't even call it a medium, but it's the high end of things. So a lot of the time, maybe you just need 500 extra milligrams instead of the typical, 250, 350 that are in a sports drink. And then when we talk about that preload stuff, that hyperhydration stuff in particular, you have to be very clear on the fact that you're a high sodium sweater, because those things pack 3,500 milligrams of sodium per. I mean, at least with hyper, and then I think Scratches, whatever Osmo's equivalent is, and the big companies have these hyperhydration, super high sodium packets. So you got to make sure you are, in fact, spending a lot of sodium.
I think it depends on if you, there's 2 reasons why you would take that. One is you are a high sodium sweater, or 2, you want to be a camel and hold a bunch of water.
You're preloading. In that case, again, it's not just salt preloading; it's water preloading.
Exactly,
thinking of it as overhydration or prehydration. I mean, whatever term you want to throw at it. And then post is almost as important, because you shed, you'll ditch a lot of sodium, even if you're not a high sodium sweater. You're going to be low on sodium stores. So I understand that with like the rescue hydration, 1,500 milligrams post is not a bad idea either.
Yeah. I know that with this sort of thing too, like you said, in gels, you can get it in blocks. You can get so many different sodium enhanced products, I guess you'd say, or like packed full of sodium products, like those.
It's not hard to come by. It's just like caffeine. It's with everything these days.
Cliff Bar has that salted margarita, those Cliff blocks, and they come with a ton of sodium. So you can find it in a ton of different ways.
Sure. But the point is, if you ingest too much sodium during your race and you don't have water to go with it, it will actually dehydrate you.
Yes.
So that could cause cramps and stuff.
Basically, you get a lot of sodium in the gut, and the water goes to the gut, and it's not going to where you actually need it. You don't necessarily need to facilitate or direct most of your resources to digestion. You need to direct it to cooling and to muscle operation.
But you can drink enough water to balance it off.
Exactly. It's balance between salt and water intake.
For what it's worth, for me personally, I found that I don't do very well when I have really high sodium products. Like even those, I love the taste of those salted margarita Cliff blocks. But when I take them in, I usually get gut distress. I think it's because I'm usually doing mountain biking, that sort of a thing, and it's tougher to take in enough water, perhaps, for me to be able to balance that out. And I'm not a very salty.
Your sodium loss? Yeah,
very minimal. I think I've had salt stains like twice.
Yeah,
I hardly ever. So
yeah, I'm a very salty sweater. Okay, and then let's address the weight loss that he's talking about, because that's a real common misconception too. People think they get off the bike, and if they didn't drink enough water, or if they weigh less than they did when they started the workout or started the event, then they did something wrong. They got their hydration wrong. And that's not always the case. It's not simply a matter of hydration. It's not just it's total body water, not just what you sweated out and ingested over the course of it. There's also a little thing we have talked about a few times, glycogen. And glycogen packs a heck of a lot of water with it relative to the glycogen content itself. I found one study, because I was trying to quantify it. I've seen so many different, some people say there's 2 grams per gram of carbohydrate, 2 grams of water per gram of glycogen, 3 grams, 5 grams. It's been all over the place. Most people land at about 3. There seems to be a consensus there. But these guys did a study where on 2 different occasions, they took 9 aerobically trained athletes, dehydrated them over a 2.5-hour ride, waited an hour, and then gave them 250 grams of carbohydrate with only 400 mils of water. So like half a water bottle.
If you're watching on a video, I have a bottle right here. This is like a 600 milliliter bottle. So
standard bottle.
A standard, and this is a standard bottle. So that's somewhere around below the choke point of a bottle where it starts to get narrow.
It's just not much. These athletes are completely dehydrated, and they're just kind of teasing them with a little bit of water. They gave the other group of athletes, they matched their water loss. So they if they lost this 30 ounces of water, they gave them 30 ounces of water to ingest with this 250 grams carbohydrate or carbohydrate. And then they took biopsies an hour after and then 4 hours after. And in both times, the glycogen content was similar. So glycogen replenished just as normal, but the body water, with the group who only got a tiny bit of water, they replenished at a 3-to-1 rate. So they had 3 grams of water for every gram of glycogen in their system. Same glycogen between the two groups. The group who got matched water had 17 grams of water for every gram of glycogen.
Wow.
The fact being, you can, in certain instances, depending on the dehydration method and the rehydration methods, you can pack a lot of water in with every single gram of glycogen.
They were so dehydrated.
Yeah, exactly.
So they were able to
But the fact is, when you're looking at these weight changes, it doesn't necessarily mean you got your dehydration wrong. Maybe you just spent your glycogen stores. So it's not just about go in there and hammer a bunch of water so you can bring yourself back up to the weight you were prior.
Yeah.
So that's a good point. So like measuring weight as just weight at the end.
Doesn't tell you everything.
It doesn't just tell you. That's exactly right. There's more to it.
2,000 calorie workout. We did a long podcast before where you could actually measure how much of that would be fat and how much of that would be glycogen based on a gas exchange test. So let's say half of that's glycogen or more, right? That's 1,000 calories. That's a lot of weight, right? That you're going to be losing.
Yes.
1,000 grams, so 3,000 grams. Is that what you're saying?
1,000 grams.
1,000 grams.
Don't do math on air. Yeah, you guys all figure it out in your
That's
head.
at forum.trainerroad.com.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, for instance, if you take a 150-pound person, 150-pound man, so let's assume there's a fair amount of muscle mass. Men typically carry more muscle. There's about 100 grams of liver, typically, or glycogen in the liver. Another 400 grams or so in the muscles, and we know that's pretty shapeable. So we're looking at 500 grams in the muscles and liver times. Help me out. 4 grams.
Math on air.
I think we're doing it the opposite way, but
well, that's 500 grams, which means about 1,500 grams of water go along with it.
Yeah.
So that's 1.5 kgs. I mean, we're talking a fair amount of weight just in what a normal non-endurance trained
just in
150-pound male will carry.
And utilizing the glycogen that you could have.
So you get rid of that, and boom, there's 3 pounds gone.
That
doesn't necessarily mean you're dehydrated. It just means you spent your glycogen stores.
Yep. Yeah, great point. That's a really important one because almost whenever people talk about post-ride or race weight measurement and compared to pre, it's almost always used in the context of dehydration without any
consideration for where that water came from.
Someone on forum on TrainerRoad, just do the actual math. Put it in the
I think I was pretty
It'll
close
be
on that last one. That was pretty simple.
Yeah, so that's pretty straightforward there. I guess talking about heat management. So now we kind of have the science behind it all. Now we can get more into the heat management side of things.
Yeah, so he's talking about doing sweet spot work in particular. And we've talked many times before about how it's such a steady high load that you burn a ton of calories and you shed a ton of water. It's just the cooling is very important if you're going to do long sweet spot workouts. And it sounds like he's set up to do exactly that. But then how does that carry over to the outdoors when he hasn't done any form of heat acclimation, when he's done all his workouts in a warm environment and he plans to work out just that hard outside in pretty high temperatures and very high humidity?
All of his workouts in a cool environment.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly right. We did a podcast. You can go through and you can search "Ask a Cycling Coach" podcast and then look for heat adaptation. You can look up sauna, plenty of stuff. We've covered this before, but Nate and we rode entirely. This happens every time too. I rode separately. I rode in the shower.
They showered together on bikes. Weird.
And I tried a humid one. I tried dry environment, and oh my gosh, it makes. When we're talking like these rooms, I think that we got one because I put heaters into there. I used the shower because it was a closed space, basically. And we had heaters in there. I think that it was like 102 degrees inside that room and 0 air circulation.
Yeah.
And
which is very work rate limiting.
Oh, yeah. And Pettit was like the hardest workout I'd done.
Yeah. So what we learned from that is that, do most of your training in whatever environment is most favorable to being able to complete the workout as prescribed. So you can do a lot of work. And then at some point close to your event, you have to spend some time acclimating to the heat you're going to expose yourself to and the workload you're going to try to sustain in that heat.
That takes 10 to 14 days, I mean, usually.
Thereabouts, yep.
To put this another way for you, it would be a shame to train inside. Think of all of your workouts, but you're capped. Like almost like you're trying to
like being at altitude forever, never adapting to it.
That's why you want to be very choosy about the workouts that you do. Include this heat, adaptation sort of effort that you're doing is fit it in on the workouts that are lower intensity. And also keep in mind that lower intensity workout afterward, you'll feel pretty much more work than you would have normalized to or normally as well.
This goes back to Guy's comment. You don't want to limit your workouts. This is like the demotivational playlist.
Yeah.
Like, I should do all my workouts hot because I'm going to have a hot workout in the future. No, and the sad part about it is that these heat adaptations, you've researched it, Chad. We're a team here. We did it.
It's a we. That's fine.
They go away quickly too.
Yeah.
So you can't do it in March and then expect to get it in July. Just do it right before your race.
They're short-lived, which is why you have to time them accordingly.
Now, the plus side of it is you don't have to be in extremely hot circumstances. You can get these benefits from 85 degrees Fahrenheit, that sort of a thing.
You can. We talked about this recently. You just have to elevate core temperature, and you can do that at reasonably low workloads.
So
Wearing jackets too and stuff like that.
Yeah, a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So if you're working outside, so let's say that you are in a warm environment, you plan on racing in a warm environment, but usually train indoors where it's cool. If you train a couple times a week outside in that sort of heat, you're going to be getting a lot of the benefits that you get if you intentionally created that environment inside.
Exactly, and we talk a lot about what we're seeking with that, and it's just a bump in plasma volume so that we have more water on board. So back to the whole water topic. But something I don't think we touch on enough is that there's a familiarization aspect to it, psychologically being braced for what it feels like to do work in heat. Because I did a district TT years back. It was 100 degrees. I hadn't done any heat work. Last couple of days, I tried to jump in the sauna a few times. So maybe I got a little bump in my plasma volume, but I went out there and it was so strikingly unfamiliar that I just fell apart. I mean, I couldn't work from the start. I overdid most of the race and then I crumpled.
Oh, yeah.
So,
yeah, there's a... you have to be able to go through those situations and be like, I emerged okay, even though I felt like I was cooking, like I was on the surface of the sun. I emerged okay. It really does, especially when you're talking about something like a TT that requires so much focus. There are certain races like a criterium, for example, where you may, the constant tactical nature and you paying attention to the riders perhaps might take it off.
Just from the start, I mean, even if I had done like a 14-day acclimation protocol in the sauna and my body was braced for it, the fact that I wasn't mentally, and as soon as I got out there and started rolling around for a warm-up and then rolled down the ramp to start, it was like, this is too hot, I can't do this.
Got in your head before you started.
Already in my head, exactly.
Yeah. That happens, I think, to a lot of people before they get to like Kona.
Oh, yeah.
They've heard all the stories, and before they even get on the plane, they're like, "It's going to be so hot."
And
they
get
off
the plane, and it's just like, boom.
oh yeah. Then your reality hits. Like, it is as hot as I thought.
Yeah, exactly.
Shoot.
And there's something to be said for preparing yourself for the reality you'll face. But I should say for mentally preparing yourself for that. But if you aren't actually prepared for that, then you're doing yourself no favors, right? You have to be ready for it. So. Some tips, if I could. I want to share some tips, at least that I've done in races that have helped me manage heat. If you have feed zones available in the sort of racing that you're doing, and if people are able to do this for you, or you could put it on the ground or a fence post or something. But if you're drinking mix, have a bottle for mix to drink, but have another bottle of water that you can grab. That might involve 2 people in a feed zone. That might be the best way to do it. So then you can grab one, or if there's a fence post or there's something on the ground, something else, you could probably pull over and grab that bottle.
Without the lid on, right?
Yeah, so I actually like the lid on in most cases. So then I can squirt the water directly where I want it rather than dump it out and miss myself. Yeah. So, and I usually squirt it onto the back of my head and neck. I don't like to go on the front.
If you've ever made the mistake of dumping it over your head, you just
the glasses
hose your glasses down.
Yeah, and you can't see, especially if you're like doing gravel riding or mountain biking where it's dusty. Because then it makes it even worse on the lenses.
Or if you're a salty sweater and there's a bit of salt in the mix, it does. Yeah, your glasses are useless past that and on fire.
What Jonathan's trying to do is make his body into a swamp cooler.
Yes.
Where there is extra water on him, and it'll be a little bit cooler, but he really is going to get cooled by the evaporative cooling. This is when you get to that 100% humidity, this can be tough.
Yes.
There's products too. I think these have been shown. You got to keep them wet, which is the hard part. But these white sleeves you can wear. A lot of people wear them at Kona, and you'll see them where it's trying to make your whole arm into a swamp cooler, and it has a little bit of space, so it holds a lot of water. You spray that on your arms.
Yep.
People have like their whole jerseys like that, and then as the air goes over you, and it's not 100% humidity in Kona. It evaporates, then you get the cooling effect.
You see that in Kona where the guys are actually taking sponges and they're just putting sponges all over in their body, and they're trying to make sure they're getting as much new colder water on them at all times.
The sponge is nice too because you can you get like a more than one shot out of it. So when it's on you, you squish it again, and you get a little bit more.
Yeah, you kind of squeeze it.
They heat up fast though.
They do, yeah. And I usually put that water, like I said, down my back, on my lower back, on my knee, or on my legs, like my thighs, that sort of a thing. That's where I try to. I've that's something that I've seen Nino do, and then I tried it, and I was like, that's silly that he puts it on his legs. And I tried it, and I was like, this feels really good.
There's some interesting studies with cooling the hands too.
Yep.
So, and I know you can't really do that if you're in a mountain bike race holding onto the bars, but if you are in a triathlon or something where your hands are free,
It would
you could
definitely
get away with it.
to like holding ice cold sponges or even like just holding ice. If they have a bucket of ice and you can hold ice in your hands, it's because all the blood vessels are close to your skin. Like the skin, and it can cool really well. Another area is your nether regions. You put ice down there, but it's like this crazy thing where I've said this before. I gotta say it the right
It's a
way.
bit of a seesaw there.
Yeah, you've never been so cold and so hot at the same time.
Yes.
Like you're numb yet sweating profusely. But it's a great area to cool to help you rest your body. And the other one is people put it under a cap.
Yep.
So you can put, people will fill their entire hat with ice, like at a hot race. This is running, obviously, not on the bike. And put the hat on. You do all those. You put it on your hands, down your jersey. You do the back thing, and then you put an ice cold cap on.
I'm thinking of like have somebody
Okay.
pour some crushed ice over your helmet, fill in the vents a little bit. That could help.
Well, drinking ice slurries of ice too will help. That's better than if you can ingest some ice like a Slurpee kind of thing.
Yeah,
I think Slurpee should be on race food. That sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
But yeah, right. It's
perfect.
But that will cool you better than just like cold water alone.
Yeah.
Because it's colder, right? Because there's ice in there.
Totally. Ice nylons. So that's like, you'll see that on a lot of riders. They'll put them down the front or the back of their jersey usually. And they're nylons, or you can get things that don't look like nylons anymore. They're like a pouch that's made for this. It's really, a nylon will do just the same.
Reusable then?
Yeah. And they're reusable, washable, that sort of a thing. But you basically fill that with ice, and then you put them down the back of your jersey, inside your jersey, and then they melt down. It keeps the ice in place while it melts. The only thing I would say with that is get used to them in two ways. Number one, if you've never had ice nylons and somebody puts it into your jersey when you're on the line, it's going to take you a little while to get over that initial shock of having ice against your back, and you might not want to do that first thing on the line, right? The second thing is when the ice melts, I find the nylons to be super annoying, and I do notice them in my jersey. So I would recommend getting used to them. And then also, if you do notice that they've melted, a lot of the time you'll see people will leave like a little tab out of their jersey. It drives me nuts. But you could pull it out from that too. I'm not a big ice nylon fan just because of those other things with it. So.
A thought on this: Leadville, that power line climb. If it's a hot day, you had an aid station right before, but there's no wind, and it's like an hour or 40 minutes long.
So
that would be a great spot to do it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and then you could then take it off, like rip it off, and put it in your pocket, your jersey pocket when you're done.
Exactly right. Yeah. Then white versus black, it's always better to go with white. Some fabrics have coatings on them, but even then, I think still, even with the coating on them, black is still hotter than white.
Yep.
Then ventilated helmets, I know that sounds silly, but like you even switched helmets at Leadville, didn't you? We switched helmets for you. I think it's a good idea, and you can really tell a difference when you go from one helmet to the next in terms of that. So it's huge. Jersey and bib combo is almost always going to be cooler than a skin suit.
Yeah. With the same materials.
With the same materials.
Well, is it?
So it depends, right? Like, so the ones I use Quarry ones, and when I unzip in the front, it basically opens up my jersey entirely, but it's still not quite as cool as having the jersey and bibs, because I feel like there's less fabric directly on me when I unzip my jersey. Just because,
true.
You know what I mean? So
yeah, and the unzipping, that's a huge part.
Yeah.
Especially on a climb where you're not going to be worried about the wind resistance. You can fully unzip, and your back is like free.
Yeah.
Where it wouldn't be free in a skin suit.
Yeah, even a 2-in-1 skin suit, right? It still isn't fully free, whereas your back is. If you're wearing a normal skin suit, those things are really hot. So that's really uncomfortable. But, Aero over everything, I guess, for some folks. And then refrigerate your entire hydration pack and keep it in the cooler. And you can freeze your bladders and then refrigerate your pack if you want. Or forgive me, I got that backwards.
Freeze your bottles.
You can put your hydration pack in the fridge with a ton of ice, and then you can freeze your actual pack separate of that bladder. And then it seems like a silly thing, but your bag actually has a good amount of material if you get that thing wet beforehand even, and then put it in the freezer. I think that's what Jeff Kabush was doing. And then he had his hydration packs kept in the cooler for Kansas. So then when he got it on, it was like putting on an ice vest almost too.
Yeah, great.
So it's a really good help. And even if you freeze your bottles and you're going to start cold in the morning, obviously your bottles aren't going to be much use. But if it is warm, you'd be surprised how quickly those things melt out. So you could even freeze bottles as well. So those are all tips that I've done or heard of being done for heat.
One more thing for Anthony, going back to, he had a question.
Yeah, he did.
He said he was down. He was still, after that sweet spot workout, the 5 by 12 minutes at sweet spot, he was still down just about a kilogram of body weight. With the glycogen, Anthony, I wouldn't be concerned with that. I think that amount of water loss, even if it was all water, wouldn't be enough to reduce performance. Like, you can lose. We know that you can lose water weight and not reduce performance. You have to lose a bunch of water weight, and then you start to lose performance.
Yeah.
What's the famous book by the South African Dr. Noakes?
Noakes.
Yeah.
Yeah, Lord of Running.
No, he did one all in water.
Waterlogged.
That's it. Yep.
Yeah.
He's got lots of science around.
Yeah,
that,
that's
so.
actually a good book. I mean, and he points out in that the best marathon finishers, I think it's always typically talks about the Comrades Marathon, which I think is 50K.
Are the most dehydrated.
Yeah, or the most dehydrated. I mean, like at 10%, 9 to 10, maybe
Wow.
not 10. I think 9%. So it's substantial. It's a lot.
That I've had a problem with that, because if dehydration did make you slow down, like when people do get so dehydrated they slow down, then they stop and drink water, and then you finish it hydrated, right? So I don't know who, like, the most without affecting performance, like
Correlation, not causation.
And
Potentially there.
Yeah,
they weren't necessarily even looking at performance so much as core temperature at the end of that. So they found that even though these people were heftily dehydrated, they still had core temperatures in line with the people who were hydrated.
That's the takeaway, I think, is not that the most dehydrated people are the ones that win, but you can be this dehydrated and still win.
Yes.
Because someone could be more dehydrated and not win because they stopped and
It's
then
not
dehydrate.
not a race to get as dehydrated as possible.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thought of losing weight during a marathon is good. So you do.
It happens.
You want to have that balance.
Yeah.
The people at the top end, if they try to put in, just so we talked about, all that water the whole time, they could be, how many pounds did they lose?
Packing extra weight the whole time.
Yeah.
Well, 9% of it. I mean, even a runner weighs 120 pounds.
Yeah, so
that's
could be
Still a lot.
10
talking
pounds
10
of weight.
pounds, yeah.
That's a lot of weight
It is.
for running, especially.
Let's go into Rich's question. It's a quick one. He says, which group set, brand, or product has the shortest possible brake lever reach? And he's talking about drop lever or drop bars, I think. So drop bar, shifter, brake combo setups. I find even using the reach adjustment screw on Ultegra Di2 levers leaves brake levers out of reach whilst riding in the drops. I had a few recommendations on this one. And this applies to, but this also doesn't just apply to people if they have smaller hands, but it may apply just if you want different ergos. Like, you just want your levers to be closer to your bars.
This has to be a huge problem for women too.
Oh yeah, of course, because it's very, like, they never design these things for small hands ever. You know what I mean?
I don't know. I don't have particularly short fingers, and I still have trouble reaching sometimes, depending on where my hands are on the bars.
So most higher end, you'll see a lot of the time, like 105 will look like Shimano 105 will look basically exactly like Dura Ace in terms of their levers. It'll look the same, but a lot of the time, one of the things they lack is adjustment. So that's one of the things you want to look for in the product spec on whichever lever set that you end up getting is adjustment. Shimano just released that new gravel group set, and it looks like it has a closer reach with the levers there. The only thing you want to be careful with if you start adjusting that reach, or you get something with a very close reach to your handlebars, is if you have too much brake throw, you're going to
affect their sensitivity.
Yeah, you'll never even be able to get the full braking force that you want, because they'll make contact with the handlebars before that. And stopping is very important, so you don't want to do that. So now
That's a pro tip.
yeah, it's right there, pro tip.
Write that
We're gonna cut that out in its own video.
So, but what you can do, like with SRAM, I have their Force 1x shifters, the mechanical group set, but hydraulic brake ones. I have the SRAM Red ETAP ones that are hydraulic brakes. And all of those have lever reach adjustment. And I basically adjust it so that when I extend my index finger forward, because that's all I brake with, and that's really all you should ever brake with is just your index finger. And it's great with disc brakes because it's so easy. But I basically make it so that the first joint in my finger is just around that lever or just making contact with the arc of that lever. So that way I have a little bit of control. So you can adjust it with that. Now, with your Ultegra Di2 levers, when you go to electronic and when you go to hydraulic, those levers get longer and longer and longer. They're like fitting more components in that they haven't quite figured out how to optimize on space quite yet. So it's a further reach to the hood of that bar. So it's going to eat, you can adjust the lever all you want. You're just dealing with a lever that's placed further out from your handlebars.
Gotcha.
So it seems silly to make a group set and bike choice based off of lever reach, but if it's an extreme case, you might want to consider that. Going with hydraulic and electric might be bad if you're dealing with all of that. So that's one thing I would recommend. For handlebars, I think it's a big thing too, though. The
there's
shape
so many
of the
different
bars.
shapes. Yeah, I pretty much just take whatever bike I'm riding, whatever bars are on it. I don't often swap them out, so I just make it work to whatever extent I can.
Mm-hmm.
But I have noticed that some bars are really favorable or really lend themselves to a much easier reach.
Which ones, Chad?
I can't remember. That's the thing. I can't.
Jonathan, which
Jonathan
ones,
can.
Jonathan?
FSA Omega compacts are really good for that. They're really cheap too. You can find them online for like $40. New.
So aluminum bars.
Yeah, aluminum bars. They're also extremely light. They're like darn near as light as a lot of really nice carbon bars. They have really good damping, really good feel. But the best part about them is that the roll forward, it's a compact bar in terms of vertically speaking. It doesn't drop very low. Shallow drop, but then it's also compact in terms of reach. And it has kind of a quick turn down so that when your hand is in the drops, I feel like you're pretty close to the lever on those bars, relatively speaking, compared to others. So I really like that handlebar.
It seems like you should pick your group set based on performance and then do your handlebar based on the reach.
Yes.
Because it's so much easier to solve it there than to try
I
to,
agree completely.
like you said, all that stuff they have to pack in and adjust that. And there's not many choices for group sets.
Right. So the other thing that you can do is change where the levers are. So if your levers, a lot of the time you'll see with smaller riders, a lot of the time I find that they have trouble with too far of a reach on the bike, right? So they're a small rider, they have small hands, they have a shorter torso. So the top tube is already pretty long for them. And they don't want to put like a 50 millimeter stem because I don't know why, but that's just
Maybe
kind
the
of
bike
what we
didn't
do.
come with that.
Sure. So then what they end up doing is they end up rolling the hoods back
Yep.
rolling the shifters back on the handlebars. And then what that does is that just increases the distance that your levers actually sit from you in the drops because it's lifting them up and away.
Yeah.
So that's another thing. If you can roll them forward, actually, not your handlebars, but roll the levers forward in relation to your handlebar position, that's going to give you a closer reach. So you can grab them there.
That's a great tip. And if you want to do that, what you're going to have the same position is you're going to need a shorter stem, and you're going to have extra spacer or so because by rolling it forward, it's noticeably lower. Yeah, and it's kind of jarring.
Yes.
So you got to think about both those things. Don't just roll them forward and be like, I'm good to go if you want to maintain the same position.
Yeah.
But it's another great way, too, to be lower.
Totally.
Rolling forward.
Sure.
Yeah. And then on the other side of things, I know that you weren't asking about this, but I could see other people thinking this as well. On the mountain bike side of things, for levers that are easier to reach, I think the Shimano ones are great, and Magura. SRAM are tougher in terms of reach. They do have reach adjustment, but I find that with the SRAM brakes, when you start moving your lever in, you lose a lot of braking power just because it doesn't move quite as much through as much of that. But Shimano, I feel like, comes on a little quicker, so you can really adjust those levers in. I think that you have to go with like their XT or XTR, perhaps, maybe SLX, their lower line has adjustment, but that's a great one. And then Magura as well. They basically have levers that kind of come in close to the grip and then come out to your fingers rather than SRAM where they just kind of extend straight out. So it makes it a lot easier to work with. John's question. He says, my year got off to a great start and I had really good compliance to my selected base plan and most of the build. However, as always, life started to impact. With a few holidays and business trips creeping in, I've missed a few workouts and had to shuffle stuff around. My question is, can I use recovery weeks to make up for these missed sessions? I get the point of the week is to allow for adaptation in the body and to allow gains to be made, but do I really need the full 7 days? And if I were to follow, say, 3 or 4 of the recovery sessions and then replace missed sessions around that, would I still be able to get the benefit of the recovery week alongside the adaptation for the missed sessions?
That's a really good question, John. I have a feeling a lot of people wonder these very things. First off, I think I've probably been guilty of saying this myself, and I don't want to convey the wrong information. I've probably said recovery equals adaptation, adaptation equals recovery. It's not necessarily true because you can get recovered. I mean, you can do a 7-day stage race and you can recover for the second stage in time from the second stage in time for the third, from the third in time for the fourth, et cetera. So you're recovered, you're ready to do it again, but there's no real adaptation going taking place over the course of that. I mean, you finish one ride wrecked, you get your glycogen restored and rest a bit, and you're ready to go again. You're recovered, but adaptation is maybe just in the process of kicking off, and then you're going to go throw another dose of training stress at it. So the two aren't synonymous. However, adaptation does take place during recovery. So that much is true. So don't equate the two as the same thing, but do recognize that you need to be in a state of recovery for adaptation to take place.
So it just takes more time of consistent recovery to get that adaptation.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, you can do, I think I've
that makes sense. So I may not be making the adaptations that I'm going for every single day, but my recovery every day contributes to that longer ball game.
Exactly. The adaptation is going to come at some point, but if you're stacking workouts or if you have a heavy loading week or a series of loading weeks, the adaptive effect is going to come more at the end of it when you give yourself effective recovery that allows the adaptation.
So hence the existence of recovery weeks.
You got it. And recovery anything. Recovery days, recovery transition seasons, etc.
Cool.
And then recovery is subjective. So it can depend on so many things: your stress level, your age, your training history, your chronological, I said age, but your training age, your chronological age. And there's just a lot of things that can affect the rate at which you recover. And I'll get to this too, but the composition of the training load. If you're doing a whole bunch of base work, it's a lot easier to recover from that than a whole bunch of VO2 max work.
Yeah.
And then it's volume dependent too. So if you're a low volume trainer and you're only on the bike 3 days a week, you may not need an entire recovery week. You may just need an extended weekend. In fact, you may not need a recovery week, period. You could probably do 3 days of loading forever, and well, not forever, but for a very long time, and still continue to see upticks in performance, improvements in FTP, improvements in whatever, 1 minute power, 10 minute power, whatever. So, but if you're a high volume trainer, that recovery becomes much more important, especially if you're at the high end of things and you're an athlete who has ascended to a level where your gains are super marginal. It's at that point where recovery is becoming increasingly important. So you have to get it just right. So for instance, and this is just one of the ways in which recovery is subjective. If you look at masters athletes, a lot of the time it works really well to load for 2 weeks and then recover for a week. Rather than postpone it till the 4th week, they do it on the 3rd week. And that can work out really well, but again, composition dependent. Some athletes, and even in the sweet spot base blocks, because of their composition, I load for 5 weeks before I recover. And I found that to work really well over the 5 years that I use these in indoor classes. So there's a certain amount of flexibility that's already built into that. You don't have to take it as gospel just because it says you need to recover for a week. Maybe you don't, because by the end of that week, maybe you're actually starting to backslide a little bit and you've recognized, I've felt fresh for 3 days now. Why am I still resting? You probably don't need to be.
Yeah. And along those lines, and we'll get into some more science on this, but Nate, you and I have mentioned this many times, but life forces me to take recovery weeks, right?
That's what's happening to John.
Yeah.
So Chad, if I'm not consistent during my 3 weeks, do I need to take a recovery week? I mean, it's pretty, you just answered the question. But.
Yeah, very probably not. So what I don't want is people to see this as checking boxes. I don't want them to do, they miss a week, so they jump to next week's workouts when there was a progression that they're going to skip effectively, and then they go back and tack that progression on later when it doesn't even make sense. They've escalated their VO2 max workouts from 5 to 6 to 7, then they miss the one that has 8 and jump straight to 9, and then during a recovery week, go back and pick up that 8 interval workout.
Right.
That's not how it makes sense. So you have to do a little bit of rearranging. And you also have to consider that over the course of that recovery week, you do still need some recovery, very probably. So don't go into it and take, ideally, I want the recovery done early in the week. Give yourself some recovery and then tack on those workouts and go into your next loading block. I mean, you could do it the other way around. Actually, you could do the other way around. I guess that is a bit flexible.
The
do
big
whatever you want.
Yeah, but just
be
paying attention to when you need the recovery and taking the recovery at the right time.
I can't remember the last time I took a recovery week because life makes me inconsistent. I try as best as I can to be consistent, but I think everybody listening to this knows, and for that from experience, like, the plan's laid out and you try as hard as you can to do it, but then you miss 1 or 2 workouts that week. And then as a result, with that weekend, when you have an off day, something like that, you're like, man, I really don't feel that tired, because you're used to sustaining more and just life doesn't allow you to sustain it.
I can remember my recovery weeks and I always get a big pump in fitness because the previous weeks I did the actual volume that I needed. So I did the 3 or 4 weeks of volume or 5 in sweet spot base. And then I took a recovery week and I was like, wow, I'm a new athlete.
Most of your recovery weeks, though, are like a work trip, something like that. A lot of the times,
this next month, I have 2.5 weeks of, 3 weeks of travel over 4 weeks, and I'm not gonna be able to train during any of those, or do very little. And so there you go. Like I'm trying to load into it. because why would I take a recovery week right before that?
Sure.
Yep.
Life happens.
Yeah, and I found that, so in my case with like right now, I've been following general build, and when I go through general build and I have that recovery week that comes up, I've been going through and basically, and this is optional. We get to see if Chad thinks I'm doing something wrong live on air here, but basically, so let's say I have weeks 1, 2, and 3, and I'm building up, and then the 4th week is that recovery week. Yeah. I've been repeating week 3's workouts, but then I've been tacking on whether it's an extra interval. I've been tacking on perhaps shrinking rest, adding tempo onto the end, something like that.
So you're recognizing I'm still fresh enough to be able to do harder workouts, and you're progressing those workouts, making them harder workouts. So that's exactly the way I'd recommend doing it, and that's the way I'd recommend people do it. I mean, just because you arrive at a recovery week, if you know I don't need recovery right now, I'm still going strong, and you're being sensible about it. You're not just riding a wave and pushing yourself because you can, but you feel that you should.
Yeah, and an easy way to do this with the app is you can extend the cooldown now. So you basically just extend the cooldown, and then if you're on a smart trainer, just put that smart trainer in resistance mode. So then you can ride it, whatever you want, and then you can dictate what you want to do for your interval. Yeah. It's an easy way to do it.
Sure.
So I've done that same thing where if I have, let's say I have a 4-week block, but I'm traveling on the 5th week. So that travel, I know that should be my recovery week. Sure. On the 4th week, I'll repeat the 3rd week like you do, Jonathan, but I'll just repeat it. Because usually the 3rd week, like they were so hard, and I'm going to have a little bit extra. Like I don't need to progress anymore. I just want to maintain that,
right?
Because
it's giving you enough as is. Right?
Exactly, it's giving me plenty. Yeah. And then too mentally, because I normally like, that 4th week, it's recovery, get to rest. I'm like, at least I'm doing the same workouts I've done before, so it's a little bit easier mentally, and then I go into the last week.
You have to be adaptive and you have to be responsive. You can't just take a training plan at its for what's presented. You can't just look at it and say, this is what I'm going to do regardless. I mean, there's always other factors entering into it.
Totally.
So this is just one of those instances where you get a sense of, what you can and cannot handle.
I think it's like the, no offense to some people, but it's like The Office where the GPS tells him to turn, and he's like listening and turns into the river. This is the way it's supposed to go.
We have to follow the machine.
We have to follow it. It's okay.
That's a great episode. That was funny. Ryan's question, he says, hey guys, love your podcast. Been using TrainerRoad. I've been a TrainerRoad user for roughly 2 years now. But I've only really followed a plan for the past 6 to 7 months, which brought me a solid PR at Ironman Oceanside 70.3 by following only the sweet spot based high volume plan. It really gave me confidence in my pacing, knowing I trained at all of those watts during the winter. So nice job.
Yeah, it's perfect for that.
That's the best thing when you've done it in training and you just got to do it in race.
Yeah, it's easy. I've done it before. Yeah, that's pretty cool. It says, my question is this: as much as I believe in specificity, I do really love to cross train as well, as I feel it breaks up swim, bike, run. And I can totally understand that for triathlon. Cyclists probably just don't understand, we feel like we train a lot on the bike, and we do, don't get me wrong, but it is amazing to see a dedicated triathlete, all that they have to do to balance the 3 different sports and do all of that.
Weave strength training into it. And flexibility work. Oof.
It's a lot. It's a ton. And I'm not talking just pro level athletes. I'm talking amateur athletes. It's a lot of dedication that you have to have. So I can totally understand wanting to break it up. It says, with no tries coming up in the near future, I've decided to focus on cycling and specifically road racing and criteriums. I've heard that stairs or hiking can really build strength and stamina. He says, I'm from Vancouver, BC. Lucky guy. It's like my favorite place. And he says, and we have a few local hikes which summit at the top of local ski hills at around 100 meters straight or 1,000 meters straight up. So he says, as well as some local stairs, which are roughly 120 meters in elevation gain and great for running up and down. So he asks, is my time better spent just cycling and doing hills and or strength sessions in the gym, or is this a beneficial alternative to break up the focus training while adding strength and fitness? I usually spend an hour on the stairs or the hike once a week in the summers. Thanks again. Keep up the great work. Awesome product.
This is the opposite question that we had last week of why do stairs kill me?
Yes.
When I'm a fit cyclist.
Exactly right. Yeah. So I guess, should we cover stairs first, or where do you want to start?
Just I'm going to get a little more general than that.
Cool.
First off, I do want to address one thing he said because he nailed it. He asked, he said, I've heard that stairs or hiking can really build strength and stamina. That's true. I don't know about the strength so much, but for sure stamina. But where I'm going with this is that is in fact what it does, but it's a general form of fitness. Is that going to apply to what else you're doing? And this comes down to a number of considerations. So we're just balancing general versus specific training and adaptation here. And It's kind of similar to the training phases. You can get away with general stuff in the earlier phases, and it has to get more specific as you get closer to your events. So it carries kind of the same way, and the adaptations that go with it do as well. So if you're just doing stairs and hikes and you're getting some cardiopulmonary benefit or cardiorespiratory benefit, so the heart and the lungs and that sort of thing, which is general and covers everything, that's great. Do it, but recognize that it's a general form of fitness that isn't going to tailor anything specific. No big deal. And then you move into maybe build, and you start to focus on things getting a little more cardiovascular. So now we're looking at the actual blood vessels in the muscles and the particular fibers. We're getting just a little more specific with it. That's when these overlaps kind of weaken a bit. And then of course when you get into your very specific training, that's when it has to be specific, where hiking up hills and doing stairs probably aren't going to make you a faster bike rider. So it's phase dependent. There are benefits to be garnered, but the more general they are, the less specific they are. I think that's pretty obvious. So they're not going to help you. Yeah.
For the cut.
So running
Chad and I are
stairs
full of them.
isn't going to make you a faster crit sprinter. You have to get on what bike you race in criteriums and practice sprinting. So at some point you do have to get specific with it. But in your case, you're not even prepping for any particular events. So I say mix it up and add in whatever keeps things interesting for you and keeps you motivated.
Yeah, especially, with the grind of a multi-sport endeavor, for a whole year training for something like that. It's nice to have that break. And if it's something you enjoy, then that's
absolutely
awesome.
And if you're like a lesser athlete, it sounds like you've got a fair amount of experience in you, but if you're someone who hasn't been doing this for very long, then really anything you do is probably going to be enough of a stimulus to bring some form of performance improvement. So really, do stairs, do hikes, and lump that in with your swimming and your riding and your running, and you'll probably see improvement across the board. But if you're very fit, that's when you have to get really specific, because your body simply isn't going to see that as enough of a stimulus to merit any response.
Right, you're chasing marginal gains rather than chasing that low-hanging fruit.
Yep.
So I guess you get into the movement too, and we're talking about climbing up stairs. I can understand how people think that this could help cycling because my legs are kind of
that's
up.
And that's why it carries, but it carries in the same way that running and cycling are similar, but they don't utilize the muscles in the same way. It's the same joint actions, it's the same muscles, but they're not doing the exact same movements. They're not being loaded in the same way. So that's, again, it can be general at some point, but depending on, how high level an athlete you are, it's going to have to get, or how specific your events are, it's going to have to get specific at some point.
Yeah, exactly. I guess that comes down to, when you think about training to be faster on the bike, it's going to come from being on the bike.
Yep.
Yeah, straightforward there. Once again, Chad and I are just full of these pro tips today. Is there anything else you want to cover on that side of things, Chad, when we're talking about, the effects of the general versus specific?
Actually, there were, and I've kind of gotten off track here.
No worries.
We can come back.
Something I want to share with this is, and producer Ian knows this extremely well, because producer Ian, so back when we trained our junior team with Coach Kyle Dixon, and it was freezing cold and the trails are covered in snow, we would go to the University of Nevada parking garage, and the kids would run laps.
Awesome.
And they basically do that, right? And it was great for them, because a lot of the time what you were dealing with kids that, first of all, training kids for a really long time, they're going to lose interest.
Sure.
So
keep it varied.
we don't need to be out doing intervals nonstop with kids. They don't need that. The stairs were kind of fun and silly and extremely hard as well. But it was a great workout, and we basically had timed efforts where we would basically have to keep the pace up and go easy some laps or go harder some laps, that sort of a thing. And, I'm not sure that it made me a faster mountain biker in the sense that it raised my FTP on the bike.
Sure.
But I absolutely know that it made me a more fit individual when I was doing this through the winter. If I was training on the bike, it would be making me a more fit individual. So not comparing the two, but the one thing that it definitely taught me on the other side of things too, which I felt was helpful for mountain biking, which I know you're talking about crit racing, and it's kind of similar in this respect, was how to keep a sharp mind and focus while being completely blown, completely tired. Because when you're going upstairs, the consequence of tripping and falling is it's very much in front of you there. And I found that the first few times when I was running stairs, I would get tired and sloppy, and then I'd trip on a stair, right? And that was actually something that I felt was truly beneficial for me on the bike later on, is that it really taught me to kind of separate the mind space from what the body felt and stay precise on my movements. So Yeah, that's one perk, I guess.
And the other thing I did want to touch on was that we often talk about specificity in terms of energy systems. So you need to be able to go really hard for 2 minutes, and you need to be able to go really hard for 20 minutes, for 3 hours, whatever. There's also movement specificity. So when we look again, when going general to specific, you're really only going to see things that carry really well when you're getting very specific. So if you want to become a more economical rider and you want to turn the pedals less wastefully, more economically, more efficiently, that has to be done on the bike. And there are different ways to do that. I mean, when you look at running, there's the whole mileage school where you just run a lot and you gain efficiency through that. And it's true, it bears out. It's a great way to improve efficiency is to run a ton. Riding a ton, same way. You can really improve efficiency, but you can skin the cat in different manners. Plyometrics and heavy lifting factor into both better efficiency on the bike and better efficiency on the run because just of the nature of them, the muscle recruitment, the rate of recruitment. These things are general in appearance, but actually a little bit specific, even though you may not recognize it. So there is a bit of middle ground in there too.
Cool. Yeah.
Where you'll see general adaptation and more specific adaptation.
So I guess in this case, Ryan, first of all, good job at Oceanside, and enjoy some of that by enjoying the hikes and having fun with it. I don't think that it would be, unless you feel like you're really chasing the pointy end.
Just go play for a while.
Yeah, have fun with it. Emily says, my husband and I are thinking about having another tiny human. She mentions in parentheses a kid. Thanks for that. She says, after I finish my A race, which is Almanzo, which is a 100-mile gravel ride with 5,000 feet of elevation. I've made huge gains in terms of FTP and weight loss in the last year. My first pregnancy, I gained 70 to 80 pounds and didn't exercise and was greatly out of shape. This upcoming pregnancy, I want to keep the weight gain more manageable and stay moderately fit. Biking is what I like, and I would like to continue that throughout my pregnancy. I have a hybrid that I plan to put on the trainer when my road bike is starting to become uncomfortable. And hybrid, for people that don't know, it's a more upright positioned bike, usually is what they are. A lot of the time they'll have a flat bar instead of drop bars, and like I said, more upright. But my question is this: what is a good plan to maintain some of my fitness, but also not overdoing it since I'm growing another human? I understand that you're not doctors, and I need to talk to my doctor, but the general consensus is if you were doing it before pregnancy, you can just keep doing it during pregnancy, but maybe not as high of a level.
Ding, ding, ding.
So, and step one, talk to your doctor. We are not doctors.
Yeah, this is not advice.
Make the disclaimer.
This is like
right from the start.
We're in the U.S.
Also, 3 dudes.
Don't listen to us. Talk to your doctor.
I think it's fair to say 3 dudes, not.
Well, even if we weren't dudes, still talk to your doctor.
Of course,
your doctor has to be involved in this entire process. But so let's just get that out there. And I'm actually going to come back to that idea a few times throughout what I'm about to share.
Mm-hmm. Also, one thing with that that I think is really helpful is if you have the opportunity to work with different OBGYNs or different doctors like that when you're going through the process, it'd be really helpful if you could find one that is familiar with guiding people through this sort of thing. Because we actually, in the process of having our first son, we saw one doctor, but then she went on leave for a short period of time. So then we got like a rotation through a bunch of them. And it was crazy how we would get like totally different responses. One of them told her, don't do anything, lay down all day. Like that's all you need to do, right? Whereas the other doc that we typically had, she was giving us different advice. So
we had the same experience. It's like when they went through med school on some of them. But other doctors stay up to date.
That's exactly right.
Not all, we've said this before. Not all doctors are created equal. Just like all
our
accountants, lawyers,
podcast
hosts
evolves. I mean, it's an evolution. What we thought we knew, we learned later that was off base.
Yep. So Chad, you found some stuff on this.
Yeah. So first off, I have some indirect experience with this. Obviously not direct, but I have. I haven't coached anybody on the bike through pregnancy, but I have coached people with strength work, with Pilates, with even indoor classes actually. So on the bike, but not bike racing. So I have been through this. I think 3 that I can think of. There's probably another 1 or 2 out there over the years. So I have looked into this at various times over the course of my tenure as a conditioning expert. No, expert.
Don't you throw air quotes around that, Chad?
Not online, sir.
One of the consensus is that exercise in all trimesters is absolutely applicable if it's a healthy pregnancy. There's no reason why not. And for the simple reason that perceived pregnancy-related discomfort declines. So it's just not as miserable an undertaking to have a child if you're in a little better shape.
Yep.
That increases cardiac function, reduces the risk for gestational hypertension or preeclampsia. I'm pretty sure they're the same thing, and diabetes. So less likelihood of increasing blood pressure over the course of your pregnancy. as is the concern with Emily and with anybody who's even moderately athletic, is it limits weight gain and fat retention. And then it improves mental state, and obviously it improves fitness. But again, it goes back to that. I think the true benefit is, well, there's longer term, but the true short-term benefit, at least over the course of that 9 months, is that there's less complicated labor. So less chance of labor complications. I mean, that should be all the incentive any mother should really need.
Yes.
And then there's fetal benefits too. And I didn't look too deeply into this, but they talk about improved stress tolerance, so a little more resilient child when he or she's born, and then enhanced neurobehavioral maturation. So basically they deal with less learning disorders and less social behavioral issues.
Interesting.
And then the recommendations, pretty straightforward. I feel like you shouldn't need to hear this stuff, but avoid hyperthermia. I mean, if you're ramping up your body's temperature, obviously your baby is suffering those consequences as well.
Don't do heat training. Don't get in the sauna.
Definitely
Time
do
for
not.
that.
No high altitude, no high pressure, no scuba diving. So that seems pretty obvious too.
Yeah.
And for a while there was a 140 BPM cap, but as we've talked about many times with heart rate, that's a bit problematic. And this is based on 1985 guidelines from the ACOG, which is the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. They've since changed that. They removed in 94 the heart rate restrictions and exercise duration, updated again in 2002, where they basically just match ACSM's guidelines, so the American College of Sports Medicine, which is basically which is very straightforward. 30 or more minutes a day of moderate physical activity most days of the week. So they're already recommending that pregnant or not, exercise frequently. And then just, again, more common sense. High impact exercise, nope, not your bag, not right now. Soccer, skiing, karate, that sort of thing.
Karate's a bad idea.
No, karate.
Amazing.
What about MMA? Did you mention that?
I don't know. I suppose we could argue that. And then no supine exercises, so no laying on the back. And this has ramifications that can restrict the baby's blood flow. It increases your likelihood of the preeclampsia we just discussed. And then prone postures as well. Well, like I said, that'd be prone. In a supine postures, obviously you're not going to lay on your child. That's probably not great.
Yeah.
Don't do that.
Yeah.
But this is across the board. Everybody now recommends continuing a regimen, and if you don't exercise, this is as good a time as any to start. There's no reason why you should use pregnancy as an excuse to not start exercising. Don't postpone it till after you've had the child. You can start right now. Strength training is fully acceptable, but not heavy lifting. And that, again, feels like common sense. And it's not the time to introduce excessive training stress. So if your current capabilities are what they are, let's not try to grow those capabilities over the course of the next 9 months when your body's already under these new challenges.
Right.
Again. And then you have to consider just how fit you are going into the pregnancy. In particular, Sherry Ross, she's a pretty notable MD, an OBGYN. She's... I've read her stuff a few times, and she specifically talks about how even HIIT training, high intensity interval training, is fully acceptable. It varies through the trimesters. The first trimester is probably pretty normal. Second trimester, you might have a bit of movement difficulty considering there's a child that's getting larger and larger in front of your body. And then the third trimester, things like bladder pressure, breathing restriction, because everything's getting all packed up in there. And I've dealt with that very thing. Certain modifications, postural on the bike. Not me specifically, but I've had
He's
riders
guided his athletes
sit up
through.
a little taller, raise their bar height. I mean, that sort of thing, so that they can get a little bit more air in there. And then you'll see typically an elevated heart rate, which makes that 140 recommendation even more problematic. And then you just modify the workouts as necessary. I mean, there are certain telltale signs that, again, don't need me to tell you, but if there's vaginal bleeding or dizziness or faintness, increased shortness of breath, headache, muscle weakness, calf pain and swelling, contractions, decreased fetal movement, these are all causes for alarm and all the reasons why you should have very open lines of communication with your OBGYN.
Yeah. And your
So
body.
just listen to your body. You got it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's,
Exactly.
that's all I have on that.
I just want to share my experience with my wife through both pregnancies. She did the sweet spot base through both of them, and we actually she has a road bike, and we turned the bars completely up so that the drops were like farther in and higher up. So she was on a smart trainer. She never had to touch anything, but I mean it was really high. You never take that kind of thing on the road, but I hope you know what I'm talking about. It's completely rotating.
Yeah.
It's like a 70s thing, 80s thing.
Yeah.
And then she rode. She ran up until the end, until her back started to hurt, and then she just swam a bunch. So that's
Yeah. And it's also, we're saying that it's different for every person, of course, but it's also different for every pregnancy. I know of I know of a gal who is a triathlete in Arizona, and her first one she went through, and she like basically until the day of, she was still training, she was running, she was doing everything else, felt fine.
Oh, it's crazy.
And then her second pregnancy, like first trimester, partway through it, she was like, I can't do a single thing. And it was really hard, but she managed to go through it that way. So just because it's the same, just because you think that I've been through this before, it changes for sure.
I dealt with that very thing way back when I taught spin classes. There was a woman who was very fit, got pregnant, did spin classes just on the same schedule throughout her pregnancy. I think missed a week prior to, a week post, and then was back on the bike right back at it.
Yeah.
First pregnancy. Second pregnancy was so wrecked with morning sickness, she couldn't do anything.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, exactly right. It's tricky.
Yeah. And the women out there, y'all can be very fit. Maybe this happened to me, but probably not. Getting passed by a pregnant woman pushing a stroller while you're running.
There you go.
Yeah, so there's like a whole nother level of being chicked. Right?
Yeah.
Then they say hi to you. You're like, why?
It's pretty
You're
awesome.
breathing hard, right?
Yeah,
It's like a Liz Lyles thing.
That's why they're mothers and we're not. We
Yeah,
are nowhere
exactly.
near that impressive. We can't do that. Scott says, hey guys, I know you covered a lot of aero testing stuff already when you went to the velodrome with Aero. And that's ERO, for those wondering. He says, however, most of us do not have access to a wind tunnel or a velodrome. We don't either. It's pretty rare that we get that sort of thing. He says, I was reading recently about field testing using the Chung method, and it seems like it's fairly accurate and much more accessible to the vast majority of your users. Could you please cover this topic and explain exactly how to perform it? Thanks, Scott. We won't explain exactly how to perform it. We will link in forum.trainerroad.com. You'll be able to see where actually Dr. Robert Chung, just Robert Chung, I believe. I can't remember. But Robert Chung breaks out his virtual elevation method, which people call the Chung method. Here's the basics of it. And I've tried this, and then I've also tried another format with AeroTune, but it's also worth noting that there are other formats that people talk about, like the roll down method, where you'll basically just have a hill and you start at a certain point and you roll down, then you measure how far you go. They'll have other ones where you basically ride a flat portion of course, and then you measure yourself. The tricky part with all of those is the fact that you generally have changing conditions that contributed to a change in time. And the Chung method tries to normalize for that. And the way that it tries to normalize for that is it has you do laps. And those laps are done on a circuit that ideally it doesn't have to be perfectly flat. It can have undulation to it to a certain degree. You don't want it to be predominantly downhill. You don't want it to be predominantly uphill, right? We're talking about a loop here. It's best if it's rolling. He kind of has suggestions where he shows you where it's kind of like a middle ground thing. It's also best if there's minimal turns that you need to brake for or anything else like that.
Can't brake.
Yeah,
if you brake,
no braking.
It's not a valid test.
And don't coast, that sort of a thing. So if you have turns where it's like a really, tight bend, you don't want to do that. So it's kind of tough to find a course to execute on the Chung method.
And the biggest part is no wind.
Yes, and that's the really hard thing.
Well, for us.
Yes. So here in Reno, it's a windy place, and we deal with that. And I went out on a morning that I thought was dead calm, and I did a test, and we'll get into this in a bit, but the data was still, it was foiled by wind, and I thought it was dead calm. So it's really tricky. You have to have that. Now, the Chung method says that it also accounts for that to a certain degree. And you can try plugging in some variables. He has like a whole formula, which we'll link to in forum.trainerroad.com. He has a formula that you can build into a spreadsheet, and then you could kind of plug in some variables to try to normalize for it. But basically, the way that it works is that you have a lap, you repeat that lap, it follows those parameters, and you repeat it like 7 times, something like that. And when you repeat this lap, it doesn't have to be super long. You bring in the data, plug in the formula, and you should see, if you were to graph it, you should see a similar elevation profile across the whole thing. And he basically, when you plot out the data points, if you see the elevation profile constantly tipping down or constantly tipping up, or at some point in the middle it tipped up or tipped down for some reason, like one lap is lower than another, for example, if you see that, then it's a sign that the data is wrong. So he kind of guides you through on how to adjust it, but it's a manual process. I didn't have much success with using the Chung method, and I'll get into the reasons for that in just a bit. The other method that I've tried is AeroTune. That's an actual service that you can use. They have a Garmin Connect IQ app that you download, and that kind of guides you through the process as well. And that one actually doesn't require you to have a lap or anything. It just basically has a start point and an end point. And what you do is you ride it in one direction, then you turn around and ride it in the other direction. You keep the effort consistent across both efforts, when you go through that. And you try to keep, you try to enter at the same speed, and you try to, just keep the effort consistent from there. That one is said to be able to normalize for a lot of that, and you can use their service online. But even with that, we found some problems just with minor wind, and it threw things off. Now, the biggest problem, though, is that in most cases, people aren't testing with the Chung method. They aren't going, I wonder if my TT bike is more aero than my road bike, because the answer is yes. And in most cases, that would be easy to see. But a lot of the time you see people testing I wonder if I bring my head slightly down, or if I go gloves or no gloves. And a lot of the time, the margin for error with this sort of test is tricky, or I should say is wider than the differences that you're measuring in some cases, like with just the gloves. There's a guy that went online and used this method, and he tested the difference in diameter between a 2-inch ball and a really small one, and a few different sizes in between.
His name is Dr. Coggin.
There we go. That's right. Well, I'm not sure.
I'm almost positive it was him who did it.
He was he commented on this. This is a different one.
2007 or something.
This is a different one. Okay. Yeah. So actually, he commented on this guy's test and said, "Great job. You backed up what I did." But he tested this, and he showed, as it should, decreasing drag as the ball got smaller. And you'd think that's a pretty small thing. So I don't know if he just had very perfect conditions for something like that. He was using the Chung method in this case. But I couldn't really replicate that. So perhaps it's me, but that's how you can do it.
It's you. It's the wind, and the wind isn't constant on that course too where you're at because it's trees and stuff. So that just messes it all up.
It's worth saying that with the Aero tune, and I think the Chung method, but I know with Aero tune, they suggest that you have minimal trees, or at least have consistent conditions all the way across.
Because you do have some wind, it's better to have consistent wind, but this loop you had, the backside of the loop would be no wind, and then one side of the loop there would be wind.
And there's the other side of things too is when you're using this Aero tune method and with the Chung method, I recommend using a speed sensor instead of a GPS. Because if you just use GPS, that speed isn't very accurate as to what you're doing.
Sure, especially if you have tight turns.
It normalizes over time. And if you have trees or hills, it's going to really screw up that speed when you look at it in post. So that's the aero testing stuff. Louis' question, or Lewis, not sure which, says, love the podcast and have been an avid listener for almost 3 years now. I think I've made a comment about Jonathan's hair on the live stream about a dozen times now.
Not enough. Keep it up.
Yeah. I didn't submit this question, I promise. He says, anyway, my question is about sustaining your sweet spot effort for super extended periods of time, like 120 plus miles or an Ironman distance bike leg for triathletes. I hear some of the top pros, and I assume he's talking about Ironman racing here. He says still only holding around 0.78 to 0.82 intensity factor. Only is a very, that's really hard still. He says, assuming you are taking in plenty of easily digestible carbs and have a ton of grit to hold that effort, why would something like 0.85 not be possible? Something a little higher into the sweet spot range is what he's talking about. So I guess jumping into that.
Yeah, I'll speculate, but I'm pretty sure it is possible. I don't know why it wouldn't be. And there are some things, there are a couple ways you can address it. You can look at it. It really does come down to just these two things. It's a matter of diet and conditioning. First, we'll just tackle the diet because it's quick. So a typical carbohydrate reliant athlete is going to have, at some point, glycogen stores deplete. They just do, and you can't keep up with intake via exogenous carbohydrates, so stuff you put in your mouth. It's only going to replenish at such a rate, so at some point it breaks down. And if you're working at even 80%, so we're not even looking at the 85 or 90. Did you get specific?
No, just sweet spot range.
Okay, so let's just say he's talking 90% of threshold. That burns a ton of calories in an hour. So you're going to have to come into this preloaded. You're going to have to stay on top of your nutrition. And you're going to have to understand that it's going to go, and when it goes, that's it. There's no getting it back. And even at 80% of FTP, depending on where your threshold is, you can burn 600, 700, 800 calories an hour pretty easily. I mean, you don't have to be a monster to be able to nudge up to 800 calories at 80% or 90% in this case of your FTP. So it's going to be pretty difficult to do it if you're a carbohydrate reliant athlete, but over 120 miles or, a 5-ish hour bike, I still think it's possible. And then fat adapted athletes, I mean, for the few of you, or maybe there are a lot of you out there, but that's when things get drastically different. If you're a fat adapted athlete and you're barely utilizing carbohydrate and you're getting a lot of bang for your buck out of each gram of fat, or you can metabolize a lot of fat in an hour, this becomes very realistic. Peak fat oxidation is as high as in normal athletes, I think 77% of VO2 max. Or no, I think that, no, I'm sorry, fat adapted athletes, 77% of VO2 max, which is roughly 90% of FTP. So, in that ballpark. So if you can dial your fat oxidation up to this high level, and they used to say it really tops out at about 60 grams. There are no athletes who can metabolize more than 60 grams of fat in an hour. And that's not true. They started looking at fat adapted athletes more closely, and they saw that some of them were pushing up into up towards 90 grams of carbohydrate an hour, or I'm sorry, fat an hour, which times 9 kcals is, let's do some math there. I mean, 90 times 9 is 800 plus kcals.
Yeah.
So there's your 800 calories if you want to ride at whatever your FTP is for hours and hours on end. And this is fat oxidation. I mean, this is on board. Adipose, you don't have to preload. Most athletes, all athletes, have enough on it to go for 5 or 6 hours for sure. Go for much longer than that.
So diet plays a huge role.
It can play a huge role. So if you're carbohydrate reliant athlete, then you're going to have to plan your nutrition very carefully. If you're a fat adapted athlete, you've got some more flexibility, a little more leeway, and it's probably a bit more realistic.
Yeah.
And to these pros, they're going just over 4 hours.
Yeah,
like,
that's
so
true too.
Yeah, depending on the course, but
Yeah.
when you think about age groupers, like they might be happy with a 6-hour bike or 7.
But
But
even-
7's way different than 4.
Even a 4-hour sweet spot effort. I mean, that's a tall
ouch.
order.
Oh,
Ouchie.
Very tall
very
order.
painful.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's look at the conditioning aspect of it then. And really, all we're talking about here is improving your stamina. We're not talking about lifting FTP. We're talking about working at a particular percentage of FTP for longer and longer and longer durations. That is basically the definition of stamina. So FTP stays basically the same while your duration grows. And we're just looking to increase longer sub-threshold durations. And it's been, I think, just speculated. I don't know that there's any specific measurement on it, but they have thrown around a 0.85, kind of a loosely defined human potential cap of what we can do at this high-end steady state, multi-hour, 3, 4, 5 hours at a time. But we've seen evidence of this, and I know a lot of coaches, when they see a 0.85 on their Ironman athlete's bike leg, they know it's time to reassess because that's probably their thresholds probably come up and they're getting bad data. But these are also athletes who know they have to run a marathon afterwards. So if they didn't have that marathon afterwards, could they nudge it up from that 0.80, 0.81 to a 0.85 IF or 0.9? I don't think so. I don't know, maybe.
Conversely, you see a lot of them try to go for 0.85 or maybe even more.
And blow themselves up.
The marathon isn't exactly successful.
Yeah.
Afterward. That's pretty common to see.
Yep. But even if you don't reach that, 90% for 5 hours or 4 hours or whatever we're talking about here, you can always grow your stamina. And it's very straightforward. I mean, the 2x20 workout at Sweet Spot is a pretty typical workout, and most people can do that after a reasonable amount of training. A few weeks of training, and you can probably do a 2x20 at Sweet Spot. So then you go up to a 3x20, a 4x20, then you start adding in 30-minute efforts and 40-minute efforts. Then you get up to long efforts. Maybe you do an 80-minute effort, or you go back to those 40s and you just start stringing them together with shorter and shorter breaks. The 10-minute breaks become 5s, becomes 2, it's become 1-minute breaks, and then before you know it, you're effectively doing 90% of threshold for 3 hours all told.
Yeah.
I do this for half Ironman training where I think I worked up
Very
to
realistic for half.
2.5 hours at 85%.
Yeah.
But that was a building up where I'd do 90 and I'd go 80 and then I'd go 90 for 85. And then I'd go 120 for 80 and then 120 for 85.
Yeah.
And just keep
And what's
progression.
really interesting about this is if you nudge it, if you push it way up there to these really long durations, say you're doing 60-minute intervals with 5-minute breaks in between, maybe 90% is just crushing you, feel like it should, knock it back 2 or 3%. You'll be surprised how much weight a 2 or 3% reduction carries when you're already working sub-threshold and you go just a little lower below threshold.
Yeah, it's like the resolution gets so fine when you're up in that range, right? Whereas down below, it's not quite as much.
Yeah, and it does not. I mean, it's very different from what happens when you're super threshold, when you're above threshold. Because I mean, if you know your threshold power and you go just 3% above it, your time it just takes a dive. I mean, it goes from I don't even need to quantify it. It falls real fast, precipitously. But when you're at 90% and you knock it down to 88%, what you maybe could do for 30 minutes could grow to an hour and a half. I mean, that's probably a bit extreme, but the fact is a small decrement in your power output yields a much greater duration.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, to your original question here in this case, Louis, yeah, it's very much possible.
Yeah, I
perhaps.
think we're speculating, but I believe so. I don't see
Yeah.
why not. I think a lot of those athletes right now who are going out and maintaining 0.80, 0.81 maybe could do 0.88, maybe 0.90 if that's all they had to do.
It probably, yeah, exactly. It'd probably be a much slower Ironman time overall, right?
Oh, yeah. I think they'd walk the whole run. I mean,
Yep.
after they slept for an hour, it's going to be, it's a tall order.
Yeah, exactly right.
For sure. But, and you don't have to go to this extreme. Maybe you're just talking about growing your effort from a 3-hour sweet spot workout to a 4-hour, which is still pretty extreme, or a 2-hour to a 3-hour.
Mm-hmm. Eric's question, this is relatable, I think, for everybody here. He says, prior to every race, I'm in the bathroom 2 to 3 times with stomach or bowel issues. I typically race velodrome track events 3 to 4 races per night. After race 1, I can finally regulate, but I can't eat 5 to 7 hours before the races. I've tried various race day food strategies, green tea, ginseng, now CBD oil infused into something. I'm even getting some tummy rumblings just writing this and thinking about my next race. That's where I'm getting at for the relatable part, right? The nerves that happen with a race. Yeah. And he says, and that race is a week away. So what is a recommended strategy to ease my nervousness? Cat 2 track racer, Cat 4 on the road. So pre-race nerves are...
very not alone.
Yeah, and I also want to clarify, because I think I've perhaps portrayed, I saw somebody said this on the forum once, that I don't get, that Jonathan doesn't get nervous before races. And relatively speaking, because of racing dirt bikes, I feel like the nerves quite aren't as high. They were very high during those races. Sure. So that's what but I just want to clarify. I still get nervous before races. Everyone does. It's
and then when we're talking about, he says stomach bowel issues, are we talking about just needing to go to the bathroom a few times, or are we talking about, I need to go to the bathroom
exactly.
a few times?
Different, right? Because that's on it. I mean, that's also
shades of gray. I mean, we're all in there. Pre-race, it's 3 times. If I don't make it to the bathroom 3 times, I know that over the course of the race, I'm going to be in a bad spot at some point.
Yep. Yeah. So that's also not uncommon.
Spot of bother.
A spot of bother, one might say. Yeah.
Totally.
Yep.
Okay. So this really comes down to it's stress management. There's one other thing I'll throw in there a little later on, but I have a feeling it's just a matter of stress management. Yeah. So it's just an autonomic response to a threat. Whether you perceive it that way consciously or not, that's what it is. This is something that's it's frightening. Mm-hmm. So it elicits the fight or flight response to some degree. Mm-hmm. So it's just an evolutionary reaction of how our body's going to manage resources based on what's coming up, what it sees in its future. And more particularly or specifically, it's a sympathetic nervous system in conjunction with your endocrine system and the response of these two. So, I mean, aside from the stomach bowel issues, you'll see an increase in heart rate, an increase in respiration. There's an increase in peripheral vasoconstriction, meaning your arms and legs get less blood flow. The blood vessels constrict because the body's diverting resources. It's sending blood to the internal organs, to the brain, to the places where it's more imperative. And again, back to the fight or flight response, self-preservation. And it really comes down to a combination of the heavy hitters, in this case, are noradrenaline and adrenaline, or epinephrine or epinephrine, depending on which you prefer, and both of which lend to an increase in arousal and alertness, but it can also lead to an increase, and usually do, an increase in anxiety. And sometimes, sometimes anxiety increases peristalsis. So, the contractions that your esophagus does to get food down to your stomach, those continue throughout the digestive tract to move it through, to move it through. And this is basically the body trying to void itself of anything non-essential. It wants to help us run real fast. So it's trying to clear the deck, so to speak. I mean, we want everything out of there. Yep. It's just that reaction. And it's a reaction that can be toned down too. I mean, it's trainable to an extent. So we're talking about fight or flight when we kind of want a more tend and befriend response. So you look at the male side of things, the fight or flight, which is the open aggression, that either I'm going to fight or I'm going to get the heck out of here. Whereas the more female reaction, the oxytocin, estrogen related reaction, is the tend and befriend, where we rely more on social relationships to manage the stress, more on the positive, really, the nurturing, the protection, whether it's protection from a harm or protecting a child from harm. So it does boil down to oxytocin, which you think oxytocin is one of the hormones that is part of both childbirth, even when a child latches onto the mom's nipple, there's a release of oxytocin. However, there's still oxytocin. I think maybe to the same extent. I don't know, but men release oxytocin too.
Yep.
It's just it's less understood what it does in men. But the point is, we can shift our reaction from a fight or flight to more of a tend and befriend. And you don't have to put these terms on it, but you can manage it. So just get okay with it. That's all we're looking to do. So you're trying to make it less about fear and more about acceptance. You know, this is part of it. And we've talked in a million different ways about how to do this, whether it's visualization, whether it's breathing techniques, whether it's meditation. But basically, you're just trying to accept the stress rather than avoid it or run from it or perceive it as something it doesn't need to be.
Yeah.
So stress management, really.
I guess getting into the stress management part of things and how you can, I guess, kind of break it down. One of the things is breaking things down. So this helps for me is I just step back and I kind of go, why am I nervous? And I try to think of all the things that lie ahead and I try to break them down. And for my very analytical brain, that seems to work. So then I can basically say, okay, this is what I have. And one of the big things that's helped me, and this has honestly helped with every aspect of the pre-race nerves that you experience, but one of the things that's helped me is I start at my race time and then I count back, and on my iPhone, just in the notes, I create a schedule. And I know every minute what I need to do from the time I wake up, or if it's a later race in the evening from the time I leave work, whatever else it might be.
You're adding an element of control to something that if you don't do this, makes it feel out of control, which is going to make it a lot more anxiety-ridden than
absolutely
comforting.
And then going into the race, if you're worried about a turn, or if you're worried about like a certain rider, or if you're worried about something else like that, whether it's pre-riding and checking that sort of thing out, or just walking through and saying, hey, I know how to negotiate a turn. What do I need to do in a turn? I need to do X, Y, and Z. Okay, I'm just going to make sure that we do those. That's fine. I'll do it. It'll be okay. Yeah. So it's really just kind of going through that whole process. And
what else is interesting about this that I forgot to mention is that this shines a really bright light on what we're learning more and more about these days, which is the mind-gut connection, and how we know we have a central nervous system, and now they're talking more about an enteric nervous system that almost operates independently of the brain. There's communication between the two, but it shows us that the way the brain feels can influence what the gut does, or the way the gut feels can influence how the brain perceives it. This interaction between the two is becoming more and more well understood, and this is a perfect demonstration of that, right? Anxiety in the brain fuels this activity in the gut. The activity in the gut sends messages back to the brain. It's just kind of a vicious cycle, but it's one that can be managed. It doesn't have to be that. Yeah. So basically, if you get good with making friends with this enteric nervous system, and you start to further understand that brain-gut connection. And then this is kind of leads me back to meditation, because with IBS or irritable bowel syndrome, they've actually had really good results with people engaging in meditation to manage their IBS.
Yeah, amazing.
Just further supports the mind-gut connection.
And also helping that put you at ease, also psychologically speaking, not just with the gut, is hugely helpful. And that, I guess the benefit of meditation, meaning that you are in either a clear or more focused mind state or mindset going into something like this, you can accomplish that in many different ways before a race. And, your routine, hopefully you allow for some sort of open space where you can focus before a race.
The popular app for meditation right now, Headspace.
It's great.
It's awesome.
It's a really good one.
And start using it again.
I'd say that I experience very similar benefits to meditation when I have my warm up that I do. I have the same playlist that I listen to. I have everything else. And when I go into that state, it allows me to perfectly clear things out, and I can really just have a clear headspace.
Sure.
Visualization, we talked about that a couple weeks ago, and I gave that as like a tip and how it's really helped me at that Soho stage race. But it's also another thing, it reduces anxiety, and I think that's why it helped me so much. It's because you feel like you've been through it before. You've walked through it. You're not leaving it to chance, right?
Bringing control to an otherwise uncontrolled situation.
Yep.
And then I do want to talk, he said, but I can't eat 5 to 7 hours before the races, and this is a huge concern. I mean, if you're just going out and doing a couple, match sprints, then maybe not a big concern, but if you're in it for some, endurance track or just endurance work off the track, you have to eat.
Yes.
So there are some things to avoid that could that typically lead to gut distress, like excessive caffeine. So you can still have your coffee, just don't overdo it. Alcohol the night before, and certainly just prior, but it's not really realistic in this case. Dairy, fatty food, spicy food, and as much as I'm loath to recommend antacids, you can, if you're in a bad spot, use some, some Imodium or some loperamide, whatever brand you choose to go with. So that is kind of a last ditch effort. If you just simply can't manage it, or maybe you're going to get the trots on a marathon or something, so you're just going to try to preempt that. Or I understand you do what you need to do in the moment. And then do try to rule out IBS. I mean, that's probably not what's going on here. It doesn't sound like it, but make sure that's not it. Maybe you do need to be on if you've heard the term, a low FODMAP diet. So, which is just just short chain carbohydrates. So I don't even need to break it down. Just look up FODMAP, low FODMAP diet, avoid FODMAPs. And, again, with the IBS, the meditation. And then if you're, depending on your sense of humor, if you go to vice.com, they've got a couple articles. One of them's titled "Meditation Helped Me Poop Less," and then there's another one titled something I can't really say on here, but it's clever and it's a little cheeky. But there's actually quite a lot of good information on this very topic at vice.com.
Awesome. Cool. Last question, and then we're going to go to the live questions. So you can join us live every Thursday at 8 a.m. Pacific, usually every Thursday at 8 a.m. Pacific. This one's from Mike. He says, "Hello, great podcast, and always looking forward to the new info and material each week." Thanks, Mike. We appreciate it. He says, "I used the recommended Super 77 adhesive for the first time at a crit yesterday, but I think I messed something up." And what he's talking about is using 3M Super 77 to stick your number onto your kit rather than pinning it. I think all of us cyclists know that pinning numbers is extremely frustrating. It's an annoying process. These skin suits that you buy, they can cost like $400 or $500, and then you go and poke holes through it. It's crazy, right? So some people spray numbers onto their kit. So we'll go over the process for that. We also have a blog post, and we're going to be adjusting one thing on that blog post, and we'll clarify on that. But this is basically this is what he's dealing with. He says it worked, but it seemed to work too well. When I tried to take it off, it left a residue on my skin suit that just won't seem to come off. I sprayed what I thought was an even layer over the number, waited 10 seconds, then had someone stick it to me. Upon removal, the number was difficult to get off, and after 2 cycles through the washer, there remains a residue on the fabric. Did I just use too much, or is there something I'm missing? Maybe I didn't wait long enough before spraying and sticking. And on another note, it was so much easier than trying to pin on a number. I'd like to get it down, but hoping some tips could help. Thanks. And Nate, you're the number spray guy at every race. I rely on you for the number spraying.
Yeah.
Can you walk us through your process?
Yeah, and I don't care if there's residue. So
there's going to be. I don't think you can get around that.
Well, sometimes I don't have it, and sometimes I do. But
really,
it eventually
I've
comes
never
out.
Not had it. Always have it.
Yeah. So what I do is I get the number flat, I spray it, and then I immediately have someone put it on. Because if you wait till it tacks, I've always had it peel up. And I have to tell everyone, because some people are like, "Oh, let me wait till it tacks," and they wait like 10 seconds. I'm like, "Come on, put it on."
Yeah.
And you almost have to start over then, which is annoying. When you put it on, make sure you're bent over, like in the riding position.
In your posture.
Yep. And then don't have them do it over a seam. What I found is certain fabrics don't stick as well.
Yes.
So make sure you know which fabric on your back sticks well, and then have them push it in hard. So I always say, push it in hard. And I like it when I can feel the glue on my skin. Then I know the number's not going to come off.
Because Nate's erring on the side of you're doing this for aero benefit, and you don't want to lose any of that. You're okay with residue going on your
It's
kit.
a race kit, and then it's going to get a number right on top of it another time.
At some point.
I don't wear it in training.
Yeah.
They're separate, so who cares? And if you go left or right side, you get a little bit, no one knows.
I think you have to just get good with the idea that you're probably going to damage your skin suit a little bit.
Not even damage.
It's
just
not even
add
damage.
flavor to it.
Okay. Sure.
Flavor in a skin
And
suit.
so what you have to do then is you have to stay bent over in that area. If you stand up right away, what will happen is it's all stretched out, and then it will wrinkle, and then part of it could come up.
Glue back together.
Oh no! It just
number glues to
you get space.
Yeah.
So it crinkles back up, and then it doesn't work very well, and it's very annoying. And you may have to add a pin. The last thing, for those who were at Golden State, when I went to the 1, 2, 3 race, so if you're going to have more than one number.
First you should cover why you have more than one number. If
Doing
you're
multiple
racing
races.
multiple races and you need a different number for each race.
Yes,
We're not talking about using 2 numbers on the same jersey for the same race, something like that. But we're talking about a different race needs a different number.
The best thing to do is you just spray the new number and put it exactly over the previous number if it's sticking well. I was between 2 races. I had 30 seconds, and somebody peeled up part of my number. And I said, "Don't peel it up." I didn't realize they peeled it up halfway, and then they stuck the other number on, and they peeled it up from the front. And they were. I didn't. It was my fault. I didn't give directions, specific directions. Everyone doesn't know about number pinning or gluing.
Yeah.
So I started the race and I looked back and I felt it. I think some people meant comments, but I'm pretty much a 90-degrry bend.
You're like a parachute.
Yeah, where half of the I look such a noob. Half of the number was up and half of it was down. So don't be like me on that.
Yeah.
And then also I made a mistake is when you peel it off, if you have multiple numbers, make sure that you get the very bottom number. I peeled off like this halfway in between where the cloth of the number was like still stuck, and that was really hard to get out.
Yeah.
I had this like white sheet on my back that I couldn't peel up anymore.
Yeah.
So just make sure when you peel it off, you get the very bottom layer and peel from there.
A couple things. So on that note, certain paper or certain numbers are basically paper. Certain numbers are more fabric. If it's paper, I don't want to glue that thing on because it's going to end up sticking to your jersey, the actual number itself, and you're not going to be able to get that off. On the fabric side of things, I've used so on fabric that tends to be more dimpled or porous or thin and kind of has like a weave to it. I've always had problems with residue. On ones that have a tighter weave to the fabric and more shiny appearance, perhaps, that sort of stuff, I've actually had better luck with those things not having any sort of adhesive sticking. I've actually evaded the problem by letting it sit for 10 seconds, but once again, if you care about aero gains, I guess that you might not want to risk that. But
I always do the 10-second gap. I just never knew to do it otherwise.
Yeah, and it works great for me.
Seems to work fine, yeah.
Yeah, so chances are it probably depends on that. Now, we have a post on this. You can go to blog.trainerroad.com and you can look up a number pinning and you'll see this. There's a whole deal with it. And we have a video on this too. We within that, there's a recommendation to crinkle up the numbers, then it could sit flatter. And depending on, before you do that, just ask your race official because
they will yell at you.
They may not care, but they may yell at you because technically it's against the USAC regulation.
Why does it make it harder to read?
It's defacing. It's potentially it's defacing the number, and if you deface the number in any way, then that's
folding your number too.
Yes.
And then this last race, I had it glued. Again, my fault for not specifying, but too high on my back. With the way the sun was, it made it hard for the race officials to read my number. So that's another thing you don't want to do is put it like way up high.
You know what I think? We should get rid of numbers. It's ridiculous. I don't know why we even have them.
To tell who wins.
That's why we have transponders. That's why we have so many other things. It'd just be so straightforward.
I would like to see.
It's crazy.
Number holders on the bike. That'd be so much easier for everybody.
Yes.
We all just buy a little number holder.
When Chad and I went to Salt Lake City to go to a criterium randomly, that's what everybody had in that race series was they had a little thing that clipped onto their seat mast. And it basically, if you didn't have that, they had ones that would clip to your seat, something else. Yeah. And then it had a little plastic placard with a number. And it was so nice. And I don't know why we still pin numbers on. It's ridiculous. Like
you get a camera at the finish that can read all of those.
Yes.
And then transponders.
Which you have that already. It's your smartphone.
And officials can they don't, so behind they couldn't see your number, but they have motorbikes so they can ride up next to you and see your number.
Yes, it's just there's so many better ways. I feel like it's not like we're lacking for a better alternative. There are many of them, but for some reason we just keep pinning on numbers. So, okay, I'm gonna go into some live questions. I don't know if you can see them, Nate. Good.
Megan Power says USATF, USA Track and Field now allows headphones with race director's discretion in non-championship races.
Non-champs.
Yep.
Yeah. Let's see.
Someone said "Sun's out, guns out." Also, just an FYI, everyone, CTL isn't fitness. Thanks, Avery.
That's a good one. Yep. Thanks for doing that. Yep. Somebody says, when you say glycogen, do you mean carbs? He says, I understood a 1-to-3 ratio of carbs to water. I always put weight on after longer, bigger weekend rides, blah, blah, blah. So, yeah, he says...
Storage form of carbs. Yes. So glucose, carbohydrate is glucose in the bloodstream, but once we pack it away anywhere, we're chaining that glucose together into a polymer chain. So we're chaining glucose into glycogen, and you can store glycogen in the liver, store it in the muscle, and then can store little tiny bits of it elsewhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Eli asks about picking music. Is there any good sources for music on the bike? Be at the right level to match how you want to bike, for example. And there is. It's a little tricky. It's easier for running than for biking, but if you go on Spotify, you can find playlists at a certain BPM.
Yeah.
So if you're aiming for 90 cadence, you can either do 90 BPM, which will feel pretty slow, or 180, which will feel like pumped up techno. The problem is if you're doing an indoor trainer and you don't have a smart bike, you might go to 91, 92.
And it's not your power target.
Yeah,
Yeah, it
so
doesn't
I mean,
drive.
you have to change your cadence slightly
Yes.
because your gearing's not perfect. And as a marching band geek, I cannot not go to the beat. So I mean, if it's close, I can't be at 92, and it's at 90. My brain will explode. That's what you could do. But for running, you can keep your 90 cadence the whole time. So I did that for a long time to get up. When I first started running, typical a lot of
quicker
runners,
turnover.
yeah, you have a really slow cadence, and then I would listen to beats or playlists, and maybe I start at like 165 or 170, and I'd get up to 180. And when you're running at first, because I'm so slow, you feel like you're taking these really teeny steps because how fast you run is a combination of your stride length and your cadence. So I wasn't going very fast, 9-10 minute miles. But I was hitting that 180 BPM, so you take these little teeny steps. But it turned out it way injured me less because I wouldn't go as high up in the air and I wouldn't slam the ground as much. And that's debate on this, but 90 cadence for running is usually a pretty 90 or 180, depending on how often you want to hit on the beat. Is recommended.
I want to preempt something here because right now I can hear people going, why don't you have playlists that match to music for the workout and change the beat? That's something that we leave it up to individuals to choose what music they want and what motivation they want.
Too many workouts.
So
too many workouts and too many divergent tastes.
it would be exactly right. Yeah. It's just not something that we aim to solve there. And I personally, I do not care about the beat whatsoever. I never did marching band. So I don't know, but I don't care about the beat whatsoever. And when I have matched it up with my workout, I don't feel like I do any better. It's just if it's motivating music, that's fine. So Brandon says, I like to do longer rides on the weekends, but have a hard time recovering for Tuesday intervals as I take my Monday off. Would you recommend grouping the 2 weekday interval workouts together on Wednesday and Thursday, and then just doing my easier zone 2 workout on Tuesday?
Yeah, you can do that. I find too often the second workout. So what would now be... So you're going to do your Tuesday on Wednesday.
Yep.
So then your Thursday workout suffers, depending. It's a tough one. I mean, there have been a lot of weekends where I've come out of it too fatigued to do decently Tuesday morning and even Tuesday night. But if you can bump it to Tuesday night, sometimes that extra 12 hours of recovery makes an impact. Or if you could do it, if you want to do those back-to-back Wednesday, Thursday, try to do the Wednesday one in the morning and the Thursday one in the evening. Separate them by enough recovery to make both workouts productive. Or just consider rearranging your week, pushing everything forward and knowing that it might impact your weekend, but it'll leave you fresher for next week's training. So it's a little bit of a give and take.
For sure. Joe says, I have hard group rides on Tuesday and Thursday, but want to start adding in interval work. Is it more beneficial to do the intervals in the morning with the group ride in the evening, or stack them for one big workout? My first reaction is if the group rides are hard, like you say, if you try to stack an interval workout beforehand, then your group ride performance is going to suffer, depending on how hard the workout is as well. And then if you go the opposite side and you do the interval workout after the group ride, chances are the interval workout's going to be of a lower quality. Yeah. If you're going to stack them on days, then I would definitely recommend gapping them out morning to evening.
Yeah, either way, that's going to be a tough combination. Trying to do 2 intense workouts in the same day. I mean, it's not too many athletes do. In fact, I can't really think of athletes who do it productively, do 2 hard workouts in the same day. If you do 2 or 3 workouts, I'm thinking Olympic athletes and high-level athletes, they're doing 2 or 3 very different types of work.
Yeah, absolutely. You got one, Nate?
BG Calvert says, question, I am recently diagnosed diabetic. Blood glucose is a challenge to manage. Carb loading for diabetics is not appropriate. Can you provide some nutrition guidance for diabetics? I say, no, we can't. I wouldn't go anywhere on the internet to find anything like this. This is like life and death.
Sports nutrition.
I would totally
someone who's very versed in this particular matter,
like your doctor, because this is this is next level.
And real-time blood glucose monitoring too.
Yeah, exactly. It's truly life and death. So don't.
Yes.
I wouldn't ask anyone on YouTube anything.
I think I even so a friend of a local cyclist here and friend, he was diagnosed as a diabetic, and it took him probably 2 years to get to the point where he felt like he could really ride his bike again.
That's a tough balance.
Really tough to do. And I remember him even saying, like, I'd talked to a bunch of other cyclists who had it, and I tried doing what they did, and that's what made it so hard to come back. He basically had to put his health as a human first, and then try to figure out how cycling works.
Silver lining, though, I mean, the change in lifestyle, assuming cycling is a drastic change in lifestyle, could actually lead to improved blood.
That's what people hear. It's like, hey, just cut carbs and you won't be diabetic anymore. or read this book and you won't be diabetic anymore.
Yeah, it's not that simple,
not
but this
necessarily
is a
the
step in
case.
the right direction. Adding exercise, adding a more active lifestyle.
Yeah.
If you're coming from a sedentary one, this is a proper move. So as much as I'd like to be able to tell you this is what you do to make cycling and diabetes work together, like Nate just said, we can't do that. But
Yeah.
I admire you for the effort.
One thing to add to this too is that my friend that I mentioned, he rides all the time now. It manages it very well.
Wasn't there? What's the pro team that's all diabetic?
Yeah.
Team Type 1,
Type 1.
Yeah.
Novo Nordisk.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
it can be done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Pretty
Yep,
impressive.
It can be done. We just don't know how.
Yep.
Well,
We
each situation is individual. That's why for a life and death thing, people might give you generic advice, which might hit the bell curve and might work for some people, the advice coming in YouTube. But for your specific case, because the risk is so high,
Oh yeah.
we don't even know what type. I don't think he even said what type of diabetic he is.
You said Type 2.
I don't know.
Did he?
But anyways,
Yeah.
there could be other complications, all this sort of stuff. It gets very complex. Yeah.
Somebody said that they were riding behind you in a race, and they said that the number pocket in your skin suit looks like a sauna, and he felt bad for you.
Oh yeah. So I am
is.
getting those removed. Yeah.
It is a sauna. It's terrible. So Adam says, I've been experimenting with using platform pedals on the trainer with the intent of being able to improve efficiency and motor patterning via learning to not pull up on the backside. Am I correct in thinking that pulling up is undesirable, particularly in a sprint when you can completely unload the rear wheel? I disagree with that.
I think there's a small handful of people who think platform pedals work for everything, and I couldn't disagree more.
Yeah. I agree. So as far as pulling up being undesirable, no, absolutely not. It's there, and you should be able to, when you sprint effectively, you should be able to pull up, but then you should also be able to keep that wheel on the ground.
There's a lot of activity to be garnered over the rest of the 360 degrees other than simply that downstroke.
Yep.
It doesn't necessarily mean more power, but it does mean very often a better pedal stroke.
Yes. Yeah. So my brother who he's used flat pedals and he's used clips. He's mostly a gravity oriented mountain biker, but climbing more these days. I bet that eventually he'll probably be switching back over to clips because he's.
Yeah. And for
done both
downhill and
sides.
gravity type stuff, I understand platform pedals, but from a training perspective, I mean, clipless pedals
Yes.
I mean, there's a reason that's pretty much all you see.
Mm-hmm.
John says he's got a good tip. Vaseline will remove the glue if you want to get the residue off of numbers, and then wash as usual. Personally tested and proven to work.
No kidding.
Cool. Yeah.
So you just smear Vaseline on the adhesive and wash it?
John, you tell me.
There we
Sounds
go.
like it, right?
Yeah, that could work pretty well.
Ash says it's a big safety pin corporation conspiracy.
I think it is. I think it is. Maybe that's what USAC actually is. It's just a safety pin corporation.
Shell corporation.
Exactly. That's all it is. So Scott says, as an official, I can attest that crinkle numbers are really hard to score or see and score accurately. Yes, we understand that. And even with transponders, you got to have numbers as a backup. Sometimes systems fail. You can have other backups. And guess what doesn't fail is a placard on your bike.
But what if you have to change
always there.
bikes? What if in the rare instance you have to change bikes?
Then mark
Get
it
two
down.
placards.
Mark it down.
I'm just saying, there's.
Yeah.
I understand the redundancy.
Let's say in a race that there's one person that has to change a bike. Let's say there's 3 people that have to change a bike. Make a note of that. When the person switches out the bike, make a note that they did that, and you'll have 3 people, and you can figure it out.
I've never seen in the pits an extra bike too.
Yeah.
Like,
No,
I mean,
it
there's
doesn't
cross,
happen. It doesn't
but then in
happen often.
crits,
Yeah.
never seen it.
No, I know.
Exactly
I'm just
right.
playing devil's advocate here. Jeez.
Yeah. I'm passionate about number hate.
Jared says,
I am too. I hate painting. That's my least favorite thing about bike racing.
It
Yeah.
truly is. Yeah, absolutely. Every time I have to pin a number
Rather-
on, I'm like, this is the worst.
I'd rather crash than pin a number.
I feel like that's why.
Honestly,
I bet that's why a lot of pro mountain bikers, or like a lot of mountain bikers, just do mountain bikes, not do road. Like Alexi.
That's the only reason.
That's the only reason. Alexi Vermeulen, he like insanely fast road cyclist, right? He got 3rd in TT Nats at national level. He rides mountain bikes now. I'm gonna follow up with Alexi and ask him how much number pinning.
what broke
he did
him?
That. Yeah, it's probably the
Jared
final
says,
pin.
we need more stories about Nate at band camp. And I actually did go to band camp, Lake Tahoe band camp. Really nothing exciting happened.
no way.
Yeah.
Bandcamp? No thanks.
That was mean, Chad.
I'm just saying.
Okay, so there's the last one I guess we'll cover on this one. This one's for Veronica. She says, what if you feel bad at the end of a recovery week? Take more recovery or continue with the plan and possibly reduce workout intensity if needed. I would favor the...
More recovery usually.
Yeah, exactly. So if you really feel bad, because first of all, I never feel like when I going back to the recovery discussion, when life hasn't given me a bunch of lemons and I'm able to just follow through on the training, and then I really do need that recovery week, I never feel like charged and ready to go necessarily after that recovery week. The following week is when I actually start to feel better.
Yeah, if you still feel bad, you're probably still in the throes of an immune response, which is what adaptation basically is. As long as it's not just feeling flat from inactivity. But if you still feel bad, it's just akin to being sick or verging on being sick. You're not going to go throw more stress on top of a body that's already stressed. So I would just extend the recovery a day or two.
And then if you still feel bad, I would do a tester workout.
Yes.
I recently had this where you feel bad, then you do a tester workout, and it's like, whoa, I'm actually not
okay.
bad.
Yeah.
Because
totally.
you don't want to just keep going.
And that's more the flatness I'm talking about.
Yeah.
You feel like you just can't
tough
do it,
though,
but you
right?
get on and you can. Yeah.
It's tough to know.
Absolutely.
Daily.
Okay, well, thanks for joining us, everybody, and thanks for joining us live or through the podcast, however you did that. We look forward to chatting with you all next week and hopefully seeing you live. Nate won't be here next week. I don't think he will. We'll even be without producer Ian as well. So, but we'll have people in seats here for you guys that will do a great job. So no worries there. And it will be Thursday at 8 a.m. Pacific next week. We'll have a varied schedule coming up after that, but we'll still have a podcast every week. So stay tuned for that. If you're curious about what we do here at TrainerRoad, or you use TrainerRoad, you should share it or check it out. We appreciate that. We have exciting things coming out all the time, and you can do that at TrainerRoad.com. And if you enjoy this podcast, you can rate it or share it. Sharing it is super helpful, and we'd appreciate that. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you next week.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.